on Flight 1121, something is wrong. The Twin Otter is losing altitude fast.
Oh my God.
It falls into a steep dive. Less than 2 minutes after takeoff, Flight 1121 crashes into the Pacific.
Oh my God.
News that a plane crashed and narrowly missed the town of Staines is soon the top story across the country. Within an hour, the news reaches Chris Pollard, a new investigator with Britain's Accidents Investigation Branch.
At the time that I arrived on the site, the rescue attempt had started big time, and the site was very, very active with people.
Investigators are struck by something unusual. In most accidents, momentum carries the wreckage forward after it hits the ground. The crash at Staines is different.
The tail had not moved very far from where it had initially struck the ground, and the rest of the aircraft probably hadn't moved forwards more than about 50 yards, which for such a heavy aeroplane is very, very little distance.
Nearby power lines tell part of the story.
The older investigators, they were pointing out the power lines which had passed over very, very shortly before the first impact point.
If you walked around the back of the remains of the tail unit, you could look backwards and upwards, and there were overhead high-tension cables. This told you really that the aircraft must have been coming down at a very steep angle in order not to interfere with the cables.
The undamaged wires and compact crash zone tell investigators that the plane fell to the ground suddenly and steeply. It's a sure sign that the plane stalled.
All the sort of basic impact signs were that the aircraft was stalled. The first question is why?
London's Heathrow Airport.
Beeline 548 requesting start.
The crew of British European Airways Flight 548 is completing final preparations for an afternoon flight to Brussels. Captain Stanley Key was supposed to have today off, but was called in at the last minute. Key is a former Royal Air Force pilot and one of the airline's most qualified captains.
Starter master. On.
It takes 3 pilots to fly the plane.
Droops down.
Jeremy Keeley is the co-pilot.
Flaps 20.
Simon Ticehurst will help monitor the instruments.
Engine 1 start.
Engine 1 start.
Beeline 548, clear for takeoff.
548.
The captain calls for takeoff power.
Maximum thrust.
Second Officer Ticehurst monitors the plane's speed.
100 knots.
They can't lift off until they reach rotation speed, 139 knots.
Stopwatch on.
Rotate.
Undercarriage up.
$60 seconds.
As the plane climbs, passengers are rocked by turbulence.
Beeline 548 climbing as cleared.
548 airborne at 09. Good day.
Roger.
Keeley prepares to throttle back the engines. If he does it too soon, the plane won't have enough power to climb.
75 seconds.
He'll have just 5 seconds to get it right.
85 seconds. 90 seconds.
Keeley reduces power just in time.
Passing 1,500 feet.
The procedure goes well.
548, climb to flight level 60. Squawk 6615.
The tower clears them to a higher altitude.
Up to 60.
Then,
What was that?
the plane begins to lose altitude.
Look at the speed! Look at the speed!
All 118 people aboard BEA Flight 548 are killed. At AIB headquarters, engineers piece together the wreckage of Flight 548. By testing the reassembled systems, investigators should be able to tell if there is a broken part or faulty mechanism that could have caused the stall. They soon notice a problem.
That can't be right.
A lever is set to an unexpected position. It's used to operate crucial lift devices on the wing known as droops. Droops are aerodynamic surfaces that can be extended from the front of the wing. They increase lift during takeoff to help the plane climb. Droops should only be retracted once the plane has enough speed to maintain lift without them. If one of the pilots pulled in the droops too early, it would have instantly put the plane into a dangerous stall. There's no way to tell just by looking at the droop lever whether the crew moved it before the crash or if it was jostled out of place by the crash itself. It might even have been moved during recovery operations.
Hang on, will you?
To determine how the all-important lever was last moved, they must carefully examine the cables connected to it.
Retracted.
There's no longer any doubt. Someone in the cockpit moved the droop lever. It's a troubling discovery. They travel to BEA's flight simulator outside London. The team hears about a nagging problem for pilots of the Trident plane. The handle used to retract the droops is nearly the same shape as the one used to adjust the flaps.
I can see why you confuse them.
Beeline 548, climbing as cleared.
It's the co-pilot who's supposed to raise the flaps after takeoff.
548 airborne at 09. Good day.
Roger.
But the third pilot sometimes helps out.
85 seconds.
If the flaps were already up, it would be all too easy to pull in the droops instead. If their theory is right, investigators should be able to find other cases where pilots made the same mistake. The team reviews the flight records from nearly 100 other Trident flights.
It's not just this crew.
They find 2 near accidents where pilots pulled in the droops by mistake. It now seems the crash of BEA Flight 548 was the result of a confusion over control levers. Authorities implement a number of changes designed to prevent similar accidents from happening again. Handles on the Trident and other planes are redesigned to eliminate the possibility of confusion. And cockpit voice recorders are now standard equipment in almost all commercial passenger planes. Los Angeles International Airport. Hughes Air West Flight 706 prepares for takeoff. There are 44 passengers on board.
Welcome aboard, folks. We'll be getting underway
Any minute now.
Captain Theodore Nicolai is in command today.
Roger, 24 left, climb heading 250.
First Officer Price Bruner is also highly experienced.
Runway's clear. Throttles are all yours.
At 6:02 p.m., the Hughes Air West flight lifts off from LA. 372 miles from Los Angeles at an airbase in Nevada, Marine pilot James Richard Phillips and radar intercept officer Christopher Schiess is one of a group of fighters that's been practicing air intercepts over the western United States. The F-4's high-altitude oxygen system was leaking.
So there's no way to fix it at this base.
And the mechanics in Nevada couldn't fix it.
Sir, it's Lieutenant Schiess. Yes, sir. Will do. Yeah, they still want us to head back to El Toro.
To avoid using the broken oxygen system,
just keep it nice and low.
They've been ordered to fly at low altitude. At 5:15 p.m., the F-4 takes off. Pilot Rick Phillips cruises lower than he ordinarily would. If it weren't for the oxygen problem, he could fly much higher and clear of commercial traffic leaving Los Angeles. At around 6 p.m., the pilot needs to climb to avoid the mountains ahead and get above a layer of haze.
Copy, Rick. Climb to 15,000.
There's a basic concept in aviation called see and avoid. It's every pilot's job to watch out for other planes. Investigators wonder why the pilots of the DC-9 did not take any action to avoid the disaster.
It's coming in at 420 knots from the north, slightly east. The DC-9 is coming in at 320 knots from the southwest.
Okay, 040, direct to target.
What's the rate of closure?
In the seconds before the crash, radar operator Schiess has his head down checking his scope. Pilot Phillips is likely checking instruments.
At 15 seconds, the F-4 is 1/10 of an inch big in the window. Tiny. 10 seconds, 3/10 of an inch. Still tiny, but maybe now we can see it. 5 seconds, the entire window's filled.
Just another hazy day.
Watch it!
None of the pilots that day had enough time to see the other plane in their path.
Watch it!
Hughes Air West 706, reset your transponder. Radar contact lost. Radio check, how do you hear me?
What the hell happened?
A DC-9 with 49 people on board has slammed into the California hills. Controllers should have been able to spot the F-4 and warn Hughes Air West Flight 706 that it was on a collision course. Investigators hope recordings of air traffic radar will tell them more about what the F-4 pilots were doing. But the controllers on duty that day say the fighter didn't appear on their radar at all.
I would have warned Hughes if I'd seen the jet.
And they have the tapes to prove it. There appears to be no way to explain why the radar system in Palmdale didn't detect the F-4. Then, investigators discover some key details about the equipment installed there. The system may not have been reliable enough to accurately track a fast-moving fighter jet. investigators conduct a radar test. They fly an F-4 along the route to see whether it can be picked up by radar in Palmdale.
Oh, was that something there?
The F-4 does 6 runs. The controller can barely track the high-speed fighter.
It might have been a plane, or maybe not.
They conclude it was almost impossible to detect the Marine F-4 as it streaked across the sky. To make matters worse, in 1971, military pilots were not routinely briefed on civilian air traffic routes. And the military plane was not under orders to check in with civilian air traffic control. The investigators reach an alarming conclusion. Air transportation in America has a dangerous flaw. The military and civilian systems don't communicate. The exhaustive investigation produces 2 separate reports, one civilian and one military. They cover every detail of the deadly accident. The reports lead to important changes in the rules governing aviation. Military pilots are now advised of all restricted air traffic zones near commercial airports. The size and shape of the zones has also changed. No longer merely spokes on a hub, restricted airspace at busy airports now surrounds the entire terminal. Lessons learned from the accident helped force changes to air traffic control that make passengers safer to this day. The captain's constant attempt to level the plane he believed to be turning sharply left actually put the aircraft into a deadly spiraling dive to the right. But there's a troubling question. Even if the captain was confused by his instrument, why didn't the first officer notice the problem and take steps to save the plane? Investigators wonder what could have prevented First Officer Colasar from noticing his captain's mistake.
Climbing level 110, crosshair 4908.
It was the first officer's job to monitor the instruments.
APR off. It's coming.
But he had an extra challenge during Flight 498.
Turning left to Zurich East.
Crosshair 4908.
The plane's computerized navigation system was a new addition to the cockpit. Cockpit design is a complicated process. Pilots need to be able to reach everything easily, as well as monitor a vast array of instruments, including the artificial horizon located directly in front of them. Investigators wonder if an awkward cockpit design made it difficult for the first officer to see what was going on. To find out, they conduct an unusual experiment.
Okay, let's begin.
V1.
They reconstruct the flight to see exactly where the first officer was looking when things started to go wrong.
Gear up. Looking at the gear handle.
Gear is up.
APR off. Crosshair 498. Climb to flight level 110.
Climbing level 110, crosshair 4908. Coming.
His duties kept his gaze away from the artificial horizon.
Now he's looking here. Now I can look up.
By the time the first officer could see what was happening, the plane was already in a steep right bank.
Turning
left to Zurich East.
We should left.
Crosshair 498, confirm you are turning left.
Please, stand by. No!
The first officer's stress shows he knew there was a serious problem.
Left!
The captain thought his plane was turning left. He didn't understand what his first officer was trying to tell him.
Left!
After the crash of Flight 498, the airline improved training for pilots from former Soviet bloc countries. They now get 3 months of extra instruction. They also must pass an English proficiency test. Finally, all Swiss crews are now required to engage the autopilot immediately after takeoff, ensuring that they can pay proper attention to the progress of the flight. None of the crash theories are panning out. Investigators re-examine the best evidence they have, the pilot's comments recorded in the cockpit, and the information from the flight data recorder.
Turning left to Zurich East. We should left.
The timing of the captain's remark convinces investigators that his instruments were working, but that he didn't understand what the gauges were telling him.
Left! Left! Left!
The troubling question: how could a qualified pilot become so confused that he didn't know the difference between left and right? The search for an answer takes investigators to Russia, where Captain Gruzin learned to fly.
Thank you for seeing us.
They meet with Russian aviation experts. Both pilots were highly qualified. There seems to be no reason to suspect pilot error, until the Russian investigators suggest a stunning theory. They tell investigators about a troubling cluster of accidents caused by Russian-trained pilots becoming confused by a crucial flight instrument. Pilots in the Soviet Union were trained to fly using an artificial horizon that looks very different from the one used in Western planes.
Turning left to Zurich East, crosshair 4908.
In the West, the airplane symbol in the middle remains stable as the background moves. Soviet horizons work in the opposite way. The airplane symbol shows the motion, and the horizon is fixed in place. A left turn on a Soviet display looks very similar to a right turn on a Western display. In his confusion, he became convinced he was in a steep left turn. He was turning right to try to correct that problem. The captain's constant attempt to level the plane he believed to be turning sharply left actually put the aircraft into a deadly spiraling dive to the right. Investigators learned that Flight 90 was delayed for more than an hour while the airport was closed.
60 degrees in Tampa and we're stuck in a snowstorm.
Definitely be good to get home.
If ice and snow built up on Flight 90's wings during the delay, it could have prevented the plane from climbing. Ice and snow can interrupt the flow of air over the plane's wings, decreasing lift.
The importance of de-icing the aircraft is very paramount. Even a small amount of contamination can affect the performance of a wing, whether it's a light aircraft or a heavy aircraft.
They examined de-icing records from the day of the crash.
They were very, very interested in how efficient that de-icing had been.
Air Florida's procedures called for a powerful de-icing solution, one designed for very cold days.
Basically what happens is that the de-icing fluid dissolves the snow and ice sort of into a mixture. So when it's first put on at sort of full strength, it's doing quite a good job.
Records reveal that the de-icing fluid sprayed on Flight 90 was not full strength.
They homed in on the issue of the equipment itself, the mixture that was used, the procedures that were followed.
De-icing fluid has to be adjusted according to the outside temperature.
It's just de-icing fluid.
If the mixture wasn't strong enough, it might have allowed ice to reform on the wings.
You want to pass me that weather data, please?
Investigators study temperatures recorded at the airport during the long shutdown. They find that the fluid used should have worked.
They figured they'd go right behind Apple.
Though it wasn't full strength, the mixture was strong enough for the temperatures recorded on the day of the crash.
It's sloppy work, but Shouldn't have caused the crash.
Other aircraft did depart, which means that things were successful in other jetways. What was wrong with this particular aircraft that caused the crash?
Come on, I've got an idea.
With little data from the FDR, NTSB investigator John McAdill comes up with an unusual way to analyze the power coming from Flight 90's engines by analyzing the sound they made. Jet engines contain turbines that make different sounds depending on how quickly they're spinning. When the engine needs more power, the turbine spins faster and the frequency of the sound changes.
You ready to go? Yeah.
The sound of Flight 90's engines should tell McAdill how much power they were generating, and thanks to the unique design of the 737, with its engines mounted close to the cockpit, he already has a recording of the sound he needs. They play back the cockpit voice recorder in a soundproof room.
120.
V1.
Can you take the stick shaker out?
Forward. Forward. Come on.
Lose the crew voices.
Forward. Forward.
The technician eliminates the other sounds in the cockpit one by one, until all that's left is the sound of the engines. The results are dramatic. Investigators now know that the Boeing 737's engines weren't running at full power during takeoff. What they don't know is why. McAdill has no hard evidence that the sensor was blocked, but he decides to follow a hunch. He uses a piece of tape to simulate the effect of ice blocking the engine sensor. He recreates the actions of the pilots on the day of the flight.
Okay, start her up.
And he records the sound of the engines from inside the cockpit.
Keep throttling up.
He increases power until the engine gauges match the target set by the crew of Flight 90.
Got it.
Blocking the sensors on the test flight should create the same reduction in engine performance as on Flight 90. Both engines should sound identical.
Okay, let's see what we've got.
McAdill compares the sound of his test flight to the engine noise captured during Flight 90's takeoff.
That's a perfect match.
Investigators believe the ice on the wings degraded the plane's performance. When combined with low engine power, though, it was enough to rob the pilots of the lift they needed to climb. The Air Florida disaster was a wake-up call for better flight safety in winter conditions. In the aftermath of this accident, northern airports around the world improved de-icing facilities so that pilots can de-ice near the runway just before takeoff. Powerful technology now clears runways faster, helping airports avoid long delays after a heavy snowfall. Since the Air Florida disaster, pilots and regulators better understand the risk of winter flight. November 12, 2001. It's the Veterans Day holiday in the United States, a day off for many. But at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport, it's another busy day. Flight 587 lifts off at 9:14 a.m.
American 587 Heavy.
2,300 feet above the ground, disaster strikes. The plane is losing altitude and falling out of the sky.
Holy crap!
and the plane is heading straight for the houses of Queens, New York.
The sound at first was just a normal airplane flying above. I was still in bed, kind of half sleeping, half awake. As it started to get louder, that's when you felt little vibrations.
We're stuck in it!
Howard, look to the south. There's an aircraft crashing.
Airplane going down.
Get out of it! Get out of it! Get out of it!
The house started vibrating very heavily. You know, this all happened really quick.
The fuel ignites a massive fireball, engulfing several homes.
My whole window was bright orange, really loud, really bright. I just jumped up looking for my glasses and pretty much with my dad ran out to the front of the house.
Are you missing any flights? American Airlines Flight 587.
We ran out the front door. All I could see, because I didn't have my glasses, I couldn't find my glasses. The whole street was covered in flames. My whole side of my house was covered in flames, and there was just black smoke billowing up, like really high.
What the hell happened?
I remember looking back into my house, and the whole kitchen area was just black. It was all thick black smoke already.
Fire rips through the quiet neighborhood, and a city still in shock from the events of 9/11 is plunged back into fear and chaos. Was this terrorism, or was it an accident? Flight 587 crashed in Queens.
Look at these rudder inputs.
Investigators turn to the best clue they have, the unusual rudder movements.
11 degrees left. 11 degrees right. Could he have ripped the tail off his own plane?
Normally, pilots only move the rudder a couple of degrees in either direction to steer the plane. Investigators wonder if the extreme rudder movements on Flight 587 created the aerodynamic force needed to tear the stabilizer off.
You ready?
To find out, they create a computer simulation of an A300 and fly it the same way as First Officer Molin, moving the rudder 11 degrees back and forth 3 times.
That's it. There. That would have done it.
The discovery finally explains what happened to American Airlines Flight 587, but it doesn't explain why. It's clear the pilot should have had no trouble handling the amount of wake turbulence they experienced on takeoff, but that's not what happened on Flight 587. They don't understand why an experienced pilot would move his rudder so violently to fly out of the wake. Investigators believe the first officer was following his training when he overreacted to wake turbulence. They learned that some trainees were presented with an impossible scenario.
For this drill, there's a Boeing 747 just ahead of you. When you encounter his wake, the upset will begin.
They were told that wake turbulence would induce the sudden roll.
The wake turbulence rarely tilts you more than 10 degrees in any direction, and it's easily recoverable.
Unfortunately, the exercise was exaggerated. The airplane banked one direction a little bit and then went very strongly to 90 degrees, which is a tremendous bank in the opposite direction.
The only way to recover is with sustained rudder inputs.
Little wake turbulence, huh?
Yeah.
First Officer Molin was trained to believe that severe wake turbulence could cause a catastrophic upset.
The first officer began responding with wheel back and forth and accompanied by rudder, a back and forth rudder.
Hang on to it. Hang on to it.
He thought it was some outside turbulence or something else that was happening, and he was making opposite controls and was fighting himself and didn't know that it was actually his inputs that were causing the problem.
The first officer's actions stress the vertical stabilizer until it breaks under the strain. After the accident, American Airlines changes its training procedures dealing with wake turbulence.
Once it became clear that some negative training was going on, American Airlines, to their credit, revamped the program to prevent this type of activity.
The training simulator has been modified to be more realistic. Inputs have an immediate effect. Pilots are now taught not to use the rudder at high speed. A new warning light is also installed in the cockpit to help prevent pilots from deflecting the rudder too far during flight. NOAA 42 was to descend just 1,500 feet above the water before entering the storm, Hurricane Hugo. 30 minutes behind NOAA 42, an Air Force Reserve C-130 was also heading for the storm at a much higher altitude, 10,000 feet. NOAA 42 was the first plane into the storm. The G-forces are some of the most powerful ever recorded in any hurricane, and far beyond what the plane was designed to withstand. A broken sensor couldn't properly regulate the amount of fuel flowing to the engine. When the sensor failed,
We're losing number 3.
it fed too much fuel to the engine, and it ignited into a stream of flames.
Emergency shutdown handle.
Pulling the handle starves the engine of fuel and douses the flames. But the loss of an engine has left them in a dangerous bank, and they're still losing altitude.
More power.
Oh, thank God. Never been happier to see the inside of a hurricane.
The crippled plane has made a narrow escape, emerging into the relative safety of the hurricane's eye. The world is watching as Hurricane Hugo churns across the Atlantic. It's a massive cyclone, over 375 miles wide. The storm is marching steadily toward the Caribbean and threatens to hit land in less than 2 days' time. On dozens of islands and along the U.S. coastline, people rush to get out of Hugo's path. But high above the ocean, a team of hurricane hunters is to try to exit out of the storm. The only way out of the storm is back through it. But with only 3 engines running, re-entering the eye wall at this low altitude would be suicidal. Their best hope is the Air Force Reserve C-130, still approaching in the storm.
NOAA 42 to Teal 57, we've had an emergency, we've lost 1 engine.
Once the C-130 passes into the eye, it might be able to fly close enough for the crew to assess the damage.
Teal 57, we're gonna need a favor.
I don't know if we can climb high enough on 3 engines. You coming down to us?
Roger, NOAA 42, starting our descent.
No sudden moves. They're on us.
NOAA 42, you look like you're still in one piece other than that de-icing boot.
Teal 57,
We're gonna need another favor. We can't stay in here. Fuel's gonna be an issue very soon.
can you help us find a soft spot?
Roger that, we'll see what we can find.
On board NOAA 42, there's nothing to do but wait.
Any word yet, guys? NOAA 42, I think I have something for you.
The Air Force plane has found a possible exit point.
Try the northeast quadrant.
Roger. Northeast quadrant. We'll see you back at base.
Let's hope they're right.
NOAA 42 is going to try to punch through the storm at 6,000 feet. They hope the winds at this altitude will be less destructive.
Set condition 1.
The Air Force crew has chosen the exit point well. There is far less turbulence at this altitude.
That's more like it.
After a tense 20-minute journey back through the storm that nearly killed them, the crew finally escapes Hugo's powerful grasp.
Oh my God. What a day.
Yeah, a little too close for comfort, if you ask me. Teal 57, we're out, and I think we owe you one.
All part of the service. We'll see you guys back on dry land.
After their harrowing ordeal, everyone on board gets safely back to Barbados.
Well, the first thing we've got to do is find the rest of this plane.
Taylor's first job is to convince the government to fund a new search of Flight 870's wreckage.
Yes, could you put me through, please?
It could cost millions, and there's no guarantee it will solve the case.
No, we absolutely have to have more of the plane.
The basic conclusion from what we inherited was that we needed to recover more wreckage, and we said so very clearly.
There's no way to make any conclusions without more of the wreckage. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, bye.
If anyone can find the wreckage, it would be Taylor. During the Lockerbie investigation, he helped create a software program to locate widely scattered debris.
You have two effects: how far a piece will travel in the direction that the aircraft was originally traveling, and how far it'll be blown downwind by whatever winds there are. But the computer can do this very easily.
Taylor convinces the Italian government that his program can find more wreckage.
Okay. Altitude around 24,000.
They approve his request for a new salvage operation.
Wind is westerly, about 100 knots.
But the pressure's on to deliver.
Now, that's where we should be looking.
Wind data was available, so we could feed that into our computer, and it told us more or less where the rest of the wreckage would be.
The strategy works. The effort soon recovers another 40% of the plane.
Eventually we found it. It was there, more or less within a few meters virtually of where we'd predicted.
Itavia Flight 870's reassembled fuselage reveals a new hole at the back of the plane. It appears to have been caused by a bomb.
Yes, well, we know what that is.
Investigators study more wreckage from that part of the plane.
What have we got here? Ha! Well, look at you.
The steel wash basin has been bent upwards by an explosion. Just what investigators would expect to see if a bomb exploded in the rear lavatory.
The more we discovered, the more they all pointed back to an explosion in the rear toilet area.
Taylor and his team finally have enough evidence to say what brought down Itavia Flight 870.
I think it was a bomb.
There's just one more test they need to do to be sure.
Okay, let's blow it up and see what happens.
Investigators place explosives inside a DC lavatory to test their theory that a bomb brought down Flight 870.
3, 2, 1.
If the shattered pieces match Flight 870's debris,
okay, let's go see how we did.
It will provide strong evidence that they're right. The explosion creates distinctive damage. It's nearly identical to what was seen in the debris from the lavatory of Flight 870.
Okay, measure that one, will you? Yeah.
We were absolutely sure, yes, no doubt.
The evidence can't reveal who planted the bomb, but investigators now have a good idea where it was placed. Based on the physical evidence, the aircraft's last radar return, and the location of debris, investigators now have a clear picture of Flight 870's final moments.
Itavia 870.
Call back for descent.
Thank you for everything. We'll call you for descent 870.
What?
There's an explosion close to the pylon of the right-hand engine, which caused the right-hand engine to come off.
In less than 10 seconds, the plane breaks apart and plunges into the sea.
Monsieur David, I have the angle of attack sensor data. Impeccable.
Investigators hope the flight data recorder from XL Airways Flight 888 will finally explain what went wrong in the skies over Perpignan, France. Information from a key set of sensors stands out.
That's odd.
Partway through the flight, 2 critical sensors failed at exactly the same time.
We know they were descending here, but the sensors still show a climb.
Angle of attack sensors act like small weather vanes on the outside of the plane. During flight, they pivot. Their movement helps the flight computer monitor the position of the plane, so it can automatically adjust the flight systems to maintain lift. If the sensors got stuck in one position when they malfunctioned, it would explain why the computer didn't detect the dangerous angle of the plane.
We need to get a look at those sensors.
Investigators test the mechanism that allows the sensors to move.
Anything?
It's working perfectly. There seems to be no way to explain why the sensors failed.
Or something jammed them?
David graphs altitudes and corresponding air temperatures throughout the flight.
Minus 50 at 32,000 feet.
At high altitudes, the air outside the plane is extremely cold. This gives him an idea.
Can the sensors freeze?
If there was ice in the sensor mechanism, it might have frozen them in place. Investigators wonder if rainwater from a severe storm flooded the sensors and then froze. It's a dead end.
The weather was nice that day.
The plane didn't encounter any bad weather. If water got inside the sensors, it happened on the ground, not in the air. Investigators visit the hangar where the plane spent 3 weeks being serviced. They learn the work included painting the plane, replacing XL Airways colors with those of the Air New Zealand fleet. They noticed something else in the maintenance records. The plane needed extra cleaning after the paint job was done.
Tell me exactly how you cleaned this plane.
Normally, maintenance workers use a clean cloth to remove any dust, but this time, they rinse the plane with a hose. Spraying uncovered sensors with a high-pressure hose might explain how water got so deep inside. But the investigators need proof. There's one test they need to do to be absolutely sure. They flood the sensors of an A320 with water and recreate Flight 888. At low altitudes, the sensors work perfectly.
So far, so good.
When the plane reaches 32,000 feet, the temperature inside the sensor drops below freezing.
There they go. The sensors aren't moving.
The water inside freezes, and the sensors stop working. The result explains why the flight computer didn't prevent the plane from stalling during the low-speed test.
Get your power at idle. Adjust pitch. Flaps full.
With the sensors frozen, the computer can't calculate the plane's true angle of attack. Before the crash, XL Airways Flight 888, the captain tries to fly out of trouble. He increases power while pushing his side stick forward to bring the nose down. It's a textbook maneuver to prevent stalling, but it doesn't work. The plane continues to pitch up until it loses lift and falls from the sky. Investigators need to know why. The flight plan calls for flying the plane through a series of 35 in-flight tests that make up what's known as an acceptance flight.
Okay, get your power at idle.
A computer simulation helps investigators analyze Flight 888's final flight check.
Okay, here we go.
Captain Keppel deliberately slows his plane down for the test, but the computer lets the speed drop too far, below the minimum needed to keep the plane in flight. Investigators notice a warning on the cockpit flight display moments before the crash.
There. What is that?
They learn that the warning is supposed to alert the pilots the flight computer is no longer helping to fly the plane. It is switched to full manual mode. The warning comes on when the plane's computer gets conflicting information. The frozen sensors are telling the computer the plane is flying level, while other onboard sensors are relaying its extreme nose-up attitude. One must be wrong.
The plane gave the pilot control right here.
It seems the crew of Flight 888 either didn't see or didn't understand the warning being sent by the computer.
Stick forward.
The pilot uses his side stick to try to lower the nose.
Stick forward.
In manual mode, that's just not enough. The crew also needs to adjust the trim wheel for a more dramatic change of pitch, but they never do. Investigators need to know why such an experienced crew failed to act quickly when their plane was in danger. They suspect one reason may be the unusual nature of this flight, an acceptance flight designed to test the plane's limits.
Okay, that's good. During the turn, let's roll to 33, then to 45.
Okay.
Every time they test the plane,
Hands off now.
the automation fixes the problem.
Yep. Yes. Voila. It's all good.
Even when they hear alarms, they don't worry.
We need to overspeed.
You just want to hear the overspeed warning?
They're expecting the plane to correct the problem.
There it is. You can cancel the warning if you like.
They trusted their plane too much.
Stick forward. Flaps up. Flaps up!
With their plane in a catastrophic stall, the 7 men aboard Flight 888 were doomed.
Oh, God. Oh, God! Damn it!
The official accident report highlights several contributing factors, including the decision to perform flight checks at low altitude.
Yeah, we need to go slow with recovery.
The report also calls for clearer rules governing acceptance flights and more training for stall recovery. January 2009, U.S. Airways Flight 1549 departs New York's LaGuardia Airport. There are 150 passengers on board, bound for Charlotte, North Carolina.
The aircraft took off uneventfully, and very shortly after takeoff, they lost all engines as a result of birds.
I caught something out of the corner of my eye, and slightly to our right, but still ahead of us, was a line of birds. And they were very, very close, too close for us to maneuver around.
Whoa! After quickly assessing the situation, Captain Sully Sullenberger and First Officer Jeffrey Skiles realized that without engine power, they're not going to make it to any nearby airport.
We're going to be in the Hudson. Brace for impact.
You need to be aware of your brace position. In many, many accidents, the cabin crew are trying desperately to get the passengers into the brace position, but because the passengers haven't read the safety features card, they don't know what that means.
Get your heads down and stay down!
Proper brace position is knees together, feet flat on the floor, body bent as far forward as possible, with arms wrapped under the legs or braced against the seat in front of you.
your body's going to be thrown forward. So if you can get yourself into that position beforehand, the amount of movement back and forth is going to be reduced and the level of injury will be less.
In the cabin, the passengers prepare for the inevitable.
All the passengers really started kind of pulling together, and somebody yelled out as we were going down.
Be ready at the doors.
The folks at the door says, "We're ready."
Clay Presley does what all passengers should. He stays calm and tries to think ahead.
So I started thinking about, if we're going to crash, I know I need to figure out where the exit rows are. If the water comes in, you need to be able to hold your breath long enough to get to those 4 or 5 rows and get the doors open if you can.
But before anyone can escape, they must first survive a high-speed impact.
Looked like the airplane was going right for the bottom of the Hudson River. Then the airplane popped up, and it was just sort of gently rocking in the waves.
In an instant, the $75 million plane has become an unlikely boat floating down the Hudson River. It's now filling with freezing water.
That water was cold. It was very cold, so your feet are freezing.
You land in the Hudson in the middle of the winter, the water is going to be very cold and you're going to suffer from hypothermia very quickly. Their feet and their hands will get numb. They're going to be useless.
Passengers nearest the exits open the doors.
I just jumped up very quickly and started making my way to the emergency door. And so I worked my way out onto the wing, just a few steps to start with.
Fortunately, they had slide rafts rather than just slides. So what they were able to do was evacuate passengers into the slide rafts.
In the end, all 150 passengers and the entire crew of Flight 1549 are brought to safety. Another example of how serious aviation accidents often end well. 10 passengers are flying from Cold Bay, Alaska.
We were headed to Seattle. It was a beautiful day. It was clear, no turbulence. Highly unusual, highly unusual.
In the cockpit, Captain James Gibson and his crew have noticed something unusual as well. Not with the weather, but with their plane.
I noticed that the vibration that I was feeling in my feet and the vibration that was in the glass was different.
What the hell? Moose, have a look, would you?
Yeah, you bet.
As Gibson and Gary Lintner wait for Moose Lauren to report back, the vibrations become more pronounced.
I distinctly remember looking down and seeing my control yoke shaking.
Well, screw this. Let's turn around.
The engineer said, I want you to come back and check number 4 engine and see if you can see anything. And just as I looked out the window, the engine went. As the prop came off, I thought, oh crap, it's gonna kill me. It's gonna cut me in two. But it flew forward and then it came back and slapped the engine and then went underneath.
The prop tears a hole in the bottom of the plane.
I gotta go! I grabbed a hold of the cargo net and looked down at my foot. I'm looking straight down at my foot over a hole, straight down to the ocean.
The gash in the fuselage has caused an explosive decompression.
And then, of course, the cockpit gets all foggy, and there's almost no sound. Your eardrums are popped. It's a little disconcerting because the fog and it's quiet. You think, geez, am I dead or not?
Depending on what altitude you're at and depending on how explosive the decompression is, you may have, slightly longer than at other times, but you will eventually die from lack of oxygen.
Junior Flight Attendant Victoria Fredenhagen springs into action.
After the explosions, I wasn't sure what had happened, but I got up and got the oxygen walk-around bottle, put that on.
Jim and I got our mask on, and within seconds, Moose came through the cockpit door and said, "Holy crap, we just lost number 4 propeller."
The rupture in the fuselage has damaged critical flight controls. The crew needs to descend to a lower altitude where there's more oxygen. But the yoke is slow to respond.
Jim saw that the autopilot disconnect lights were on, and he reached over and turned the autopilot back on again.
The autopilot can do what the pilots could not.
Wings level.
Steer the plane.
Descending to 10,000.
It's a struggle, but they finally get their Electra L-188 down to 10,000 feet. The passengers are no longer in danger of hypoxia.
It's now safe to remove your masks.
Well, there's, of course, adrenaline running at that point. It felt good. I think it was just surreal because we were okay.
Re-Evolution 8 makes it to safety. The close call is a good example of the dual role that all cabin crews play. Michelle Santoren joined Air Maria just 3 months ago.
I'll take the passenger list and load sheet if it's ready. Ah, another full one. Just the way we like it.
Santoren flies these short hops on his own, with no co-pilot or cabin crew to help out.
Okay, time to fly. No time to waste in paradise. Tower, we're ready to taxi.
Air Maria, you are cleared for
Takeoff. Runway 12.
Cleared for takeoff for Tahiti.
Runway 12.
The Twin Otter has little automation. Santoren flies this plane by hand.
The majority of modern commercial planes are loaded with help for the pilots. Electronics, screens. But on this type of plane, you have the pleasure of handling the plane and fully controlling it.
At this island airport, the ocean is just off the edge of the 1,300-yard runway.
When we fly over there, it's magical. Blue lagoons, magnificent islands, the greenery, the mix of colors. It's certainly paradise.
Vacationers get to watch the regular takeoffs and landings. The flight is one of the shortest on Earth, just 7 minutes from takeoff to touchdown.
Damn it.
But on Flight 1121, something is wrong. The Twin Otter is losing altitude fast.
Oh my God.
It falls into a steep dive. Less than 2 minutes after takeoff, Flight 1121 crashes into the Pacific.
Oh my God.
The tower is told what people have seen.
Is it floating or has it gone under?
Local fishermen rush to help, but they find no survivors, only bodies. All 20 people on the flight are dead.
On a fait ce qu'on a pu, mais en fait, il n'y avait pas de survivants, quoi. Il n'y avait personne. Personne de vivant.
I will always remember. It was terrible because we were still hoping that despite what happened, people would come out alive, or at least a couple.
The disaster touches nearly everyone in the tiny island community. The Air Maria fleet is grounded when pilots refuse to fly the Twin Otter until they know what caused the crash.
A plane doesn't just crash for no reason. It was either due to pilot error or a mechanical problem. So before continuing to fly, we asked that the whole fleet be checked out.
Bonjour.
Because Morea is a French territory, a team from France's Accident Investigation Bureau, the BEA, is sent from Paris. It's their job to figure out what went wrong.
Tell me there's more.
Alain Bouillard leads the investigation.
Le Twin Otter est un avion extrêmement robuste.
The Twin Otter was an extremely robust plane. It was used in all the difficult places where other planes can't normally take off and land.
C'était quelque chose qui nous a interpellés.
That made us wonder, what could have happened to this plane that would have made it hit the water?
La surface de la mer.
Investigators usually rely on clues from the wreckage.
This tells us nothing.
But most of this plane is at the bottom of the ocean. Bouillard will have little to go on unless he can get vital pieces back on dry land.
We are going to need a lot more wreckage than this.
There's another reason to find the plane. Unlike large airliners, Twin Otters are not required to carry cockpit voice recorders. But Air Morea installed one anyway. It could hold the answers investigators are looking for.
We were hoping to get, in addition to the voice in the cockpit voice recorder, any kind of alarms that would sound.
But recovering the CVR from the deep waters off the coast of Morea will be a huge challenge.
Way too deep to send on divers.
The sea depth of this area was around 700 meters, so obviously you cannot send any diver. You need to send a remote control operated submarine.
Investigators arranged for a ship equipped with a remote-controlled submersible to assist in the recovery, the Ile de Ré. There's just one catch. It's more than 2,400 miles away off the island of New Caledonia. It could take weeks for the ship to get to Morea. Flight 1121 CVR is equipped with a locator beacon, or pinger, but the battery that powers it will only last 30 days.
We will try to send that recovery ship as soon as possible and within the 30 days of the battery life of the pinger.
C'était quelque chose qui nous apparaissait.
It looked like it was going to be a very difficult investigation if we couldn't recover the cockpit voice recorder.
De conversation du cockpit.
Qantas 32 lifts off right on schedule. It's 10:01 a.m. The pilots are just 4 minutes into the flight.
We're losing an engine. We've lost number 2. Holding 7,400 feet.
De Crespigny wastes no time taking over control from the autopilot. 35 years of flying tells him what to do next.
Matt, ECAM actions. On it.
The captain assigns Hicks to decipher the ECAM data. He needs to evaluate every message and figure out how best to react to each one.
Degraded pneumatics, hydraulics, electrics, power to the left wing shut down, flaps, slats, and ailerons are damaged but operable.
Captain de Crespigny knows he's running out of time. The failures are mounting. He needs to get the damaged plane on the ground. That means turning around and heading back to Singapore.
Singapore, Qantas 32. We require a left turn back towards Singapore.
Qantas 32, Singapore. Turn left heading 020.
A heavy load of flammable fuel means any landing attempt will be extremely dangerous. The pilots decide to circle near the airport until they can work out a plan.
Dave, I need you to run the numbers on this landing.
Check Captain Dave Evans is called into action.
3 engines, full load, all that.
He uses the A380 landing software to calculate how much runway they'll need to bring the huge plane to a stop.
Looks like we can do it, with 139 meters to spare.
Singapore approach, Qantas 32. We're going to need a long approach. And better have fire services standing by. We're leaking fuel.
Roger, Qantas 32, you're cleared straight in on final, 20 miles.
The 5 seasoned pilots now use everything they've ever learned about flying.
Flaps 3.
To try to land their plane safely.
Here we go.
De Crespigny's ability to keep his plane lined up with the runway is severely limited.
Singapore, what's the surface wind?
170 degrees at 5 knots.
If the crew misses the runway, there's no way the crippled plane can go around for another try.
Everybody ready?
The plane is gobbling up 250 feet of runway every second. If they don't slow down quickly, they risk overshooting the runway and hitting terrain that could rupture the plane's heavily laden fuel tanks.
Brakes, full brakes, Rich.
I am. My feet are flat to the floor.
Keep it in, Rich. Hammer them.
Finally, after a grueling 2-hour ordeal, Qantas 32 comes to a stop on the same runway it took off from, with less than 500 feet to spare.
Hallelujah.
Beautiful.
Oh. Welcome to Singapore, guys.
The future of the entire Qantas fleet of A380s now depends on understanding what went wrong inside one single engine.
There's really only a very select number of companies that produce the large engines, the large turbofan engines, and Rolls-Royce is up at the top.
What a disaster. I've never seen anything like it.
Simon Grummett is a materials engineer with the Australian Transport Safety Bureau.
Everywhere you looked, there was shrapnel, debris, and holes in this thing. So it was quite significant, and that was the initial response. And from that point onwards, we knew that this was going to be a big investigation, particularly for the ATSB.
The severity of the damage adds pressure to find answers.
We knew that we had a turbine disc failure. The next stage was to find out why the turbine disc had actually failed.
Investigators take the engine apart, searching for anything that could explain the catastrophic failure of the turbine disc. They discover something disturbing.
Oil fire.
In a Rolls-Royce engine.
The inside of the engine is burnt black and covered with soot and oil. The evidence tells Grummett that the fire was fueled by oil. The engine must have suffered an oil leak. Grummett examines the engine further, searching for the source of that leak.
Kev, I think we got it.
A narrow pipe is snapped off, releasing oil into the area around the turbine disc. The broken part is called a stub pipe.
This nearly brought down an A380. Jeez, man.
Investigators send what's left of the stub pipe to its manufacturer, Rolls-Royce, where a disturbing discovery is made. One side of the pipe is much thinner than the other. That's what allowed it to break apart, spraying the engine with oil and causing a near catastrophic fire.
It's no wonder it cracked. We're only talking, it was 0.35 millimeters in thickness. It's a couple of sheets of paper.
Investigators study the manufacturer's report. They learn why one side of the stub pipe was so dangerously thin. It was due to a manufacturing error. The ATSB immediately takes steps to alert other airlines that their A380s are at risk. Just 29 days after the accident, they issue a report warning that a faulty stub pipe caused a fire that led to uncontained engine failure on Qantas 32. They advise airlines to inspect their fleets. There are 20 A380s with the same Rolls-Royce engine in service around the world. 34 engines are found to have suspect oil pipes.
As a result of this investigation, all engines that had non-conforming oil feed pipes have been removed from service. Rolls-Royce have made significant changes to their quality management system. They introduced a software program which basically removes fuel from the engine in a similar event.
Perfect flying weather. Everything is following the familiar pattern.
What was that?
You have to get down!
We've lost pressure.
I saw a brilliant flash of light and boom.
Everything was being sucked out of the plane.
Here's what's happened. An explosive decompression has torn away 375 square feet of the fuselage.
We were in a tremendous blast of wind. The wind blast was unbelievable.
A mass of things just went whoosh out the plane. Hair was up here. Everybody was in their seat except the stewardesses. I saw the stewardess get smashed down in the aisle. I could see her hair blowing and I could see blood, but that's all I could see of her.
Jean Sato Tomita has been struck by debris at row 2. Michelle Honda has been thrown to the floor at row 15. There's no sign at all of CV Lansing.
I will take control column.
I can't hear you!
Only seconds have passed since the explosion. The wind noise makes it impossible for the flight crew to communicate.
We lose back there.
I can't hear you!
We've lost pressure.
Now, for the first time, they gain a sense of what's happened. Visible over a mound of tangled debris, there's blue sky where the airplane roof used to be. The first 5 rows are now completely exposed to the sky on both sides of the plane. The initial threat of being sucked out has passed since the airplane is now completely depressurized. But passengers are still in danger.
My seatmate was flopping out outside the aircraft because at that point it was just the floor and no walls or seating. And so I grabbed him.
The cold and oxygen deprivation are both potentially deadly.
Just imagine the scene up there. The top of the airplane broken off. The passengers don't have any ability to get supplemental oxygen because the critical tubing that feeds that oxygen is now gone. And at 24,000 feet, with very little to breathe up there, the passengers become incapacitated. That's called hypoxia. If you stay up at that altitude for any prolonged period of time, you become more and more physically disabled. With the top of the airplane gone, you now have 300-mile-an-hour winds blowing into that cabin. That's 3 times hurricane-force winds. Those people were dressed for Hawaii in the springtime, not minus 50-degree temperatures. Any period of time at 24,000 feet, and those people will die.
High above the Pacific Ocean, an extraordinary drama is unfolding. An explosion at 24,000 feet aboard a Boeing 737 bound for the Hawaiian island of Oahu tears 370 square feet of fuselage from the airplane. The Boeing 737 has become the best-selling commercial aircraft in aviation history. Over 10,000 737s have been sold. The accident airplane was number 152 off the production line, delivered in May 1969. The airplane was designed for a 20-year service life and 75,000 flights. This one had exceeded that number, though many were of short duration. Its fuselage was under constant stress because of pressurization.
The fuselage of the airplane is actually breathing. It expands and contracts depending on altitude. When it's on the ground, it's in a contracted status. When it's at altitude, 24,000 feet, the fuselage expands, so the airplane is constantly cycling. That's pressurization. That will weaken the structure over a long period of time. And given the history of this airplane being a very high cycle airplane, that probably had something to do with weakening the structure of the fuselage.
With thousands of 737s taking to the skies every day, investigators need to be certain what made this one burst apart. In Washington, D.C., Jim Wildey is one of the NTSB team who worked the case. His expertise as a metallurgist proves crucial.
I got a call about 2 in the morning, in the middle of the night, from my boss,
and there had been an accident in Hawaii. They were putting the team together. I hopped on a plane and went to Hawaii.
He takes samples from the remaining fuselage, and back in the lab discovers something barely visible to the naked eye. Hairline cracks like this between the holes where rivets had been. On the Aloha airplane, there's telltale discoloration inside the overlapping joints. Here is the vital clue.
You can see now where the dark material is the epoxy that was used to bond the two layers of the lap joint together. The white material you see here is corrosion damage of the aluminum fuselage skin. So the original intent was that the stress that's trying to pull one skin away from the other skin piece, the stresses would go through the bonding and not through the rivets. Of course, as this thing becomes disbonded, now the rivets themselves are loaded, and especially this top row of rivets, and this is the row of rivets we think that had the fatigue cracking in it that led to the eventual opening of the roof structure on the Aloha 737 airplane.
The Hawaii climate, with humid and salt-laden air, helps corrosion to occur. But instead of grounding airplanes for a nose-to-tail examination, Aloha has inspectors make occasional checks, often at night, when those on duty are least alert. Working under artificial light, those tiny cracks escape detection.
These cracks go unrepaired, and now you have an airplane that is a ticking time bomb.
The witness saw cracking in this area, and we found fatigue cracking back in here. So this is the line where the fatigue cracking joined up. One piece came down this way and folded off, and the other piece went across the top and came off to the right side.
The crew realizes they've been hit by a missile somewhere on the left wing. Their Airbus has become the first civilian aircraft casualty of the war.
Jelly 2-1.
Hey, Gramps, did you guys say there's an aircraft on fire?
This remarkable video was shot with the infrared heat-sensitive camera of a U.S. Apache attack helicopter.
Could you confirm if there's smoke coming from the aircraft or fire or anything like that?
Tower Dragon Tamer 5-4.
You can still see smoke and flame coming from the left tip
of the left wing.
Okay, left wing tip, fire and smoke, huh?
That's affirmative.
Thank you.
With no hydraulic power, the crew has to crank open the landing gear doors and let the wheels drop down by gravity alone. Cautiously, they manage to coax a bit more speed from the engines.
Let's land.
Tower Delta Lima Lima.
Oscar Oscar Delta Lima Lima. Baghdad Tower, can you make approach now? Runway is clear for landing.
They're swinging around to the right, trying to keep the plane steady and descend all at the same time, using nothing but the engines.
Airport's at 340, come right. Now 320. It's bumpy.
As the plane approaches the runway, the nose is pointing dangerously low and the left wing is dropping.
They are landing 3-3 left. Fire trucks on standby, Medivac on standby.
Battle has heavy 2 down.
Steady. Steady.
Come on, buddy.
Back. Okay.
Out of range.
Off runway! Oh no! No!
He's in the dirt. Dirt, or did he just come off the runway? That's what's left of him.
the DHL Airbus has managed to land through an incredible feat of flying.
Nice landing, wow.
Confirm, evacuate?
Evacuate.
Evacuation.
Both. I handle.
The DHL A300 is the first plane in Iraq to be hit by a surface-to-air missile. But in recent years, the threat of terrorist-controlled shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles has been growing.
There had been roughly 30-odd incidents of commercial aircraft being attacked by manned portable surface-to-air missiles, leading up to the DHL one.
What makes the risk of missile attack in Iraq so serious is that for months, nobody was guarding the abandoned weapons stores of the Iraqi army, leaving terrorists free to help themselves to millions of dollars worth of arms. There is widespread fear that these terror weapons could soon be targeting passenger airliners all over the world. The U.S. government's Department of Homeland Security is spending over $100 million on research to adapt military counter-missile technology for civilian airlines.
It is inevitable today that commercial aircraft will have to be fitted at some time with laser and infrared jamming systems. If you look at things like the Queen's flight in the UK, the President's aircraft in the USA, and the King of Jordan's fleet, they're all fitted. Terrorism is with us today and will always be with us for the rest of our lives. It's impossible to defeat terrorism, but what is possible is to control terrorism at a commercially acceptable level. If we don't do that, then there's no future for us.
The crash of this jumbo jet would normally be a strictly Japanese affair, but it sets aviation alarm bells ringing around the world. Only weeks earlier, an Air India 747 had gone down in the Atlantic, killing 329 people. Now, another 520 are dead. Was there something wrong with the 747, the world's biggest jet? Could there be some unknown design fault? There were some 600 747s flying worldwide. A problem with the plane would have grave consequences for aviation. Ron Schleed, a top investigator with America's National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, was assigned the case.
So it was a very big concern on our part about whether there was a problem with the 747, an airworthiness problem. And so we had to jump on this very quickly to learn what happened.
At the Washington headquarters of the NTSB, the chairman was extremely concerned at the potential consequences for world aviation. He wrote a personal note to his corresponding figure in Japan, asking him to invite the NTSB to join the investigation as guests. During the late 70s and 80s, Ron Schleed was involved with many international investigations for the NTSB. He's familiar with the sensitivities of working with foreign governments and heads to Tokyo, where he'll meet with the rest of his team. Representatives from Boeing, the plane's manufacturer, and an engineer from America's Federal Aviation Administration.
When I arrived in Tokyo, the atmosphere in Japan was extremely stressful. The news media were everywhere. There was a tremendous amount of anger.
Once in Japan, Schleed found that the local Japanese police had taken over the investigation and were treating it like a crime scene, diligently observing his team's every move.
Everyone was considered suspicious. Japanese airline personnel, Boeing personnel, were considered suspicious. They weren't even allowed to go to the accident site.
Schleid had to wait for 2 days before the Japanese authorities would allow him to visit the site.
I was able to convince the Japanese to allow us to take Boeing people to the site with the stipulation that the Boeing people stuck very close to us, and we supervised them while they were on scene. They could not operate on their own.
Schleid found that to gain access to the site, the Japanese had quickly constructed helicopter landing pads.
It was an amazing sight to look up at this mountain and see what looked like wreckage from an airplane at a distance, but you could not recognize any part of an airplane.
As the plane climbs to 24,000 feet, the air outside gets thinner and thinner. But the air inside the cabin is pressurized for the passenger's comfort. The difference in air pressure between the cabin on one side of the bulkhead and the unpressurized tail on the other stretches the bulkhead and its faulty repair to the breaking point. In a test which duplicated these conditions, cracks begin to appear and lengthen around the rivet holes. Until the bulkhead snaps. In an instant, pressurized air from the cabin blows a 30-square-foot hole, bringing down the ceiling around the rear toilets. The highly pressurized air blasts its way into the tail fin of the aircraft and simply breaks it off. From that moment on, the plane is doomed. The pilots don't know that most of the tail of their aircraft is missing, blown off into the sea below, along with the crucial hydraulic lines that allow them to control the plane. It all finally makes sense. Without the stabilizing influence of the tail, and with the loss of ability to control the rudder and flaps, the pilots cannot control the plane. The giant aircraft now oscillates in a terrifying motion called the phugoid cycle. As the nose drops into a shallow dive, the plane gathers speed, which generates lift. The nose rises again, and the plane begins to climb until it loses speed, tips over, and begins to fall again. The whole cycle repeats itself over and over again. Flight 123 is now plunging up and down in terrifying dives, sometimes several hundred feet at a time.
It really could be considered a miracle that the pilots were able to keep the airplane flying for 30 minutes or more after having lost all the hydraulics in their flight controls. But it kept circling and eventually worked its way into the mountains, and it became impossible for them to land. There was no real alternative for them at all, except to fly as long as they could and hope for some miracle, which never occurred.
Lower the nose. Lower the nose. Yes. Both hands. How about gear down? Gear down! Put the gear down!
To understand what the pilots were up against, 4 hand-picked flight crews were placed in a simulator and confronted with the same situation. Not one of them could land the plane. The pilots of Flight 123 managed to keep their plane in the air for 30 minutes, much of it among high mountains. An amazing feat of flying. Back in Tokyo, as the cause of the JAL accident was identified, Ron Schleid had to break the news to his colleague from Boeing, one of the top designers of the 747. The simple truth was that a single row of rivets had been used for the repair, when a double row was required.
And when we described our findings to him, you can imagine this Boeing man became very, very upset. Personally, was crying because of the fact that his airplane that he designed and then the people that did the repair, because it was Boeing people that designed and did the repair, had made an improper repair that caused the airplane to crash.
Boeing's reputation was damaged, but if they could derive any comfort at all from this tragedy, it was that there was no inherent fault in the 747. The plane went on to become one of the most successful civil aircraft of all time. FedEx Flight 705 is several minutes outside of Memphis, still climbing and passing through 19,000 feet. Jim Tucker is hand-flying the airplane, using control wheel steering mode, and enjoying the clear afternoon skies. A couple of feet away sits Auburn Calloway. Behind him lie frustrated expectations of a brilliant career and a marriage that ended badly. Out of the crew's sight, he prepares his weapons. The crew is in shock and confused.
Get him! Get him! Get him!
Calloway hurriedly retreats out of the cockpit. Unaware of each other's injuries, the crew starts to mobilize. Calloway has a backup plan. The spear gun stashed outside the cockpit is a deadly weapon.
Sit down! Sit down! Get back to your seats! This is a real gun, and I'll kill you!
Tucker does something that Calloway is not expecting. He pulls back the yoke and puts the plane into a sudden 15-degree climb. It throws the struggling men out of the cockpit into the galley behind.
Get him!
3.5 minutes after the attack, Auburn Calloway is pinned and injured, but still won't relinquish the spear.
Anger was coming in then, and so when I hit him, it was with the intent to disable him and eliminate his ability to fight.
Sanders has disarmed Calloway and handed the spear to Tucker.
You move, I'll kill you.
You keep him contained. I'm going to get the airplane.
Go get the airplane. I'm going.
They decide that Sanders, the captain, should fly the plane back to Memphis.
Memphis, can you hear me?
Is this Express 705 Heavy?
705 Heavy, yes.
Express 705 Heavy, Memphis. Roger, I do hear you.
You understand we're declaring an emergency. We need security to meet the airplane. We'll stop on the runway if we can.
In the galley, Auburn Calloway still hasn't given up the fight. Calloway drags himself towards the jump seats with Peterson and Tucker on top of him.
Express 705 Heavy, verify the situation is still under control?
Yeah, it's sort of under control.
Peterson manages for the first time in the fight to get hold of a hammer, but is extremely weak due to blood loss.
You gotta hit him, Andy! You gotta hit him!
The DC-10 is only feet above the runway, traveling at 200 miles an hour. Captain David Sanders has landed the plane with only 1,000 feet of runway to spare. The crew of Flight 705 is safely on the ground, but not out of danger. Sanders is the last member of the crew on board.
Standing in the door of the airplane, I had a sense of euphoria I've never experienced before or since. It was the sense of we had been there, and we came back and we won.
The crew has weathered the attack of a co-worker, but they're badly injured. Co-pilot Jim Tucker has bone chips driven into his brain. Flight engineer Andy Peterson's life is in danger from massive blood loss. Both are in critical condition. The wounded men are rushed to the regional medical center at Memphis. Restrained and under guard, Calloway is also taken to the same emergency facility. But the important question still remains. Why did Auburn Calloway attack the crew of Flight 705? The full story is beginning to unfold. Divorced in 1990, Auburn Calloway still tries to support his ex-wife and their 2 children and wants to secure their financial future. The evidence for a suicidal mission against FedEx grows as investigators search the aircraft and find a letter to Calloway's estranged wife.
Dear Pat, I want you and the kids to know that I lived for you. I thought of your welfare every day.
By April 7th, 1994, Calloway may be thinking his career is over. Life had been one disappointment after another. The failed marriage, the kids he can't afford to send to college, the brilliant pilot who ends up as an engineer on a cargo plane. And now, even that may be about to go. Calloway may be afraid he'll be fired. He comes up with a solution. Calloway cashes in all the funds he can lay his hands on and sends a total of $54,000 to his ex-wife. But his life insurance is worth about $2.5 million if he dies in a work-related accident.
I would much rather go on a date, time, place, and a method of my own choosing. I resolved some time ago that the next time my security and future is threatened or seriously jeopardized, it's time. My time to go.
January 6th, 1995, almost 4 weeks after the bombing of PAL-434, the Philippine police get a lucky break. In his Manila apartment, the PAL-434 bomber has enlisted the help of an accomplice to mass-produce his new undetectable bomb. An attempt to burn off chemicals gets out of hand. Acrid-smelling smoke spills out of the apartment. It attracts the attention of the doorman who comes to investigate.
What's going on? Sorry. We're playing with some fireworks, but it's okay. We put them out and we have all the windows open inside and we keep the door closed. It would be fine, okay?
You all open the door.
No, if we open the door, the smoke comes in the hallway. You keep it closed to go out the window, okay? Come on. It's okay. It's okay.
Until the smoke dissipates, the bombers decide to wait outside the apartment. The doorman isn't convinced by their playing with fireworks story, and he calls the fire department and the police. By the time the firemen come, the smoke is gone and they leave after a quick check. The bomber now realizes he has left a very sensitive item in the apartment, and he persuades his friend to retrieve his laptop.
He was too clever a guy to come back and expose himself, because all along he knew that that would be too risky for him to go back and be caught.
The bomber's fear of getting caught is justified. Once Police Inspector Ada Faraskal learns that they are from Pakistan, she insists on seeing their room for herself. The police in Manila are on high alert due to a planned visit by the Pope in a few days. What Inspector Faraskal finds confirms her worst fears about the intentions of the tenants.
Boss, hey now. You, stop!
The shot distracts the apprentice, and he trips over a fallen palm tree. But the cop discovers he has no handcuffs. The doorman improvises with the drawstrings of his windbreaker. In the meantime, the bomber vanishes. One of the first senior officers to arrive at his apartment is Sonny Rezan.
Incident at Doña Josefa apartment was the breakthrough in opening our eyes that the Al-Qaeda terrorist cell was already operating here in the Philippines.
The Philippine National Police know they have stumbled onto something big, and they inform Interpol, Scotland Yard, and the FBI.
We got to turn. We'll have to use differential power. Disengage auto throttle. Pull back 3 and 4.
Captain Reyes increases thrust to the engines on the left-hand side of the plane and reduces power to the engines on the right. Very slowly, the aircraft starts to circle right. He then lowers his speed to make a similar radius turn. With guidance from air traffic control, Reyes hopes that the maneuver will eventually line up with a runway at Naha.
So while we were descending on low speed, I tried to test the flight controls, and there are some little reactions.
The elevator is beginning to respond. Dex.
The elevator is a control that makes the plane ascend and descend.
250 knots. Flaps 1, on speed.
In order to land safely, Reyes will need at least minimal control over the elevator and rudder.
Flaps 5.
As PAL-434 nears Naha, he continues to reduce his airspeed.
Flaps 10 set. Speed 225.
Okay, she's turning.
Sir, if we reduce our weight, we will be able to reduce our approach and landing speeds. Suggest we dump fuel.
Sige, magaling.
Reyes orders the systems engineer to dump 36 tons of fuel.
5 minutes, 20,000 pounds.
Less fuel means less strain on landing gear and brakes at touchdown.
I was terrified when I saw the smoke trail behind each wing. I thought something must be burning and there would be another explosion.
As touchdown gets closer, Reyes worries that the bomb may have done more yet unknown damage to the aircraft.
I'm not certain our landing gear will hold up. Strap yourself in. I'll brief the purser.
So he talked to the head of the cabin crew and he said, we're not sure if the gears will go down. And in case the gears collapse while landing, be ready to evacuate.
It's either you make it or you die. That's because you cannot do anything anymore.
Runway in sight.
With only minimal control over the aircraft, Reyes faces the most challenging landing of his career. As PAL-434 starts its final approach, the 292 people on board are pinning their hopes of survival on the skill of the cockpit crew.
I know everybody was scared. We are all scared. I know that.
Gear down.
The gears were supposed to come down a few seconds, but that was the longest second. Because we were waiting for the greens to come on.
Take a long time.
It took a long time. It was a long few seconds until when it locked.
3 greens, sir.
Okay. I'm disconnecting the autopilot and landing manually, okay? Dex, monitor my descent rate, call altitude and speed. Flaps 30.
Okay, 500 feet on course.
Flaps 30 set.
Help me with the elevator. When I say push, I want you to push.
Okay, 200 slightly left.
Correcting. Push.
100. 50. 30. Power off. Pull.
Your last command was pull.
Yeah, my last command was pull.
In August 1988, a detailed inquiry into the shooting down of Iran Air 655 concludes that the captain and crew of the USS Vincennes acted properly in the face of what they believed was a threat to their ship. But investigative journalist Roger Charles is not convinced.
You're looking at a guy who's on top of the world. He's the captain of the billion-dollar Aegis cruiser, and now he's sitting at a table facing possible court-martial and, even prison time.
He reads a copy of the Fogarty inquiry and wonders why it contains no map showing the Vincennes' position.
I knew the fact that there was no such chart in the Fogarty report, again, was a signal, and a curious signal to me. Why is it not there?
Skipper, you better come down. Sounds like the Montgomery's got her nose in a beehive.
I'll be right there.
When Captain Rogers first hears that Iranian gunboats are harassing merchant shipping, the Vincennes is well south of the Montgomery and destined for port in Bahrain.
Gulf Sierra, this is Vincennes. Request permission to support USS Montgomery against surface contacts. Over.
Rogers asks Captain Richard McKenna, his surface commander, for permission to turn north to support the Montgomery. But McKenna only authorizes him to send his helicopter to investigate.
Roger that. Vincennes out. Vector in, Ocean Lord.
But Captain McKenna is later startled to discover that the Vincennes has turned around and is closed on the Montgomery's position. He orders him to leave the helicopter in place and turn back immediately.
My own personal opinion is it really did feel that they were looking for action when they went to see the Elmer Montgomery. My own feeling is that the situation was not out of control. It was really my call, and yet, even though they were assigned another station, they took it upon themselves to be there. I feel that maybe they were looking for trouble.
Jesus! Trinity Lord, this is Ocean Lord 2-5. We are taking fire.
But once the Iranian gunboats fired on the Vincennes helicopter, the situation changed.
Close Ocean Lord's position at best speed.
The rules of engagement now allow Captain Rogers to respond with force. He is now authorized to head off in hot pursuit of the gunboats. But where does that lead him? In 1990, Roger Charles obtains a copy of a restricted report on the destruction of Iran Air 655 by the International Civil Aviation Organization. It gives the Vincennes coordinates. When Charles plots them on a chart, he makes a startling discovery. At the time of the shootdown, the Vincennes is 2.5 miles inside Iranian territorial waters. By chasing the gunboats back into Iranian territory, Rogers inadvertently places his ship directly in the flight path of Iran Air 655.
If Rogers had not taken the Vincennes up to attack the gunboats, there would have been no shoot down of IR 655. I mean, that's clear.
Up on the bridge, the crew has confirmed the kill. The plane they believed was attacking them has been destroyed. Captain William Rogers thinks he has saved his ship from destruction. Nothing could be further from the truth. He's destroyed an Iranian passenger jet flying in an international air corridor. The decisive factor in Captain Rogers' decision to fire are the reports he receives that the plane is descending towards him, apparently about to attack.
Altitude declining.
It's the crucial moment. The inquiry team presses Tactical Information Coordinator Leach on his call.
Okay, were you reporting descending elevations over the net?
Over the internal net? Yes, sir.
So in other words, when you saw that track, that aircraft start descending, you were reporting that up to TAO, CO, Gulf Whiskey?
Yes, sir.
Like an aircraft's black box, the Vincennes computers have recorded all the data on the Combat Information Center's screens. Those records show that Iran Air 655 had never descended. Fogarty sends a medical team, including a psychiatrist, to the Vincennes. They report that a condition called scenario fulfillment could have played a part in the tragedy.
Range 13 miles.
Had those in command on that day checked their monitors, they would have seen that Flight 655 was not diving in a classic attack profile, but was continuing its steady climb. Yet no one thought to do so.
Well, Scott, we have this disparity between what the data indicates happened and what the people said they saw at their various altitudes. Any idea why?
Well, sir, the disparity baffles me. I thought about this for many days now, and I came to the realization that this data to me doesn't mean anything because I reacted to people I had operated with who were reliable. And when they reported at short range, they had decreasing altitude, increasing speed. I had no reason to doubt them. I had to make a split-second recommendation to the commanding officer, and I did.
So Lieutenant Commander Lustig trusts his men's judgment, and Captain Rogers trusts Lieutenant Commander Lustig's.
My confidence in Lieutenant Commander Lustig confirmed to me that the aircraft was, in fact, a threat. At 9 miles, I felt I could no longer delay defensive action. I granted fire and permission. Take order, track 4131.
The Vincennes sophisticated combat information system gives its crew accurate information. But their fear has created a threat where none exists. The discovery of oil here in the 1960s was a shot in the arm for the British economy. Brent crude, as the oil is known, is a light sweet crude, ideal for turning into gasoline, and its price is a benchmark in the international oil market. It helped turn Aberdeen, the Scottish port city closest to the oil rigs, into a boom town, the European oil capital. All the leading oil companies have offices here. The city is focused on getting the black gold ashore. Because the rigs are so far offshore and the weather so unpredictable, helicopters are the only way to reliably ferry workers back and forth. Hundreds of thousands of people make the trip every year. The Super Pumas are the workhorses of the North Sea oil industry. Used around the world by industry and military, they are durable, tough, and made to withstand the elements. There are more of these helicopters flying offshore here than anywhere else in the world. The North Sea has scores of oil fields. They are divided up between several countries, including England and Norway. The governments then sell the rights to drill to a variety of oil companies. Marathon operates 3 platforms in the so-called Bray field: Bray East, Bravo, and Alpha. North Sea oil platforms are like cities that never sleep. They stand on the seabed, held up by enormous legs of either metal or concrete. Out here, you're surrounded by the sea, with nowhere to go. The weather is often horrible, and to work on a rig can be rough, dirty, and dangerous. It's difficult to find and retain the skilled workers needed to pull the oil from the sea, so the platforms are built to keep the workers happy. Movies, internet cafes, gym equipment, and great food are provided by management to ensure the men are entertained. During 12-hour shifts, workers handle heavy equipment and deal with great heights or great depths. But there are strict rules, too. To protect the safety of everyone on board, there's no drinking, and smoking is severely restricted. The day after the crash, they find their account of what caused the accident under question.
Lightning, notionally at least, should not affect a very powerful North Sea helicopter.
This is the first time I can recall a lightning strike having ended up with this kind of conclusion.
The experts are skeptical of the pilot's story. No helicopter is known to have crashed into the North Sea because of lightning. Perhaps there had been some mechanical failure. There are even rumors of pilot error, of recklessly flying into storm clouds. The evidence to support their story was now beneath the waves with 5-6 Charlie. The Air Accident Investigation Branch, Britain's air crash detectives, begin searching for the truth. It may look like a rig, but the Stay Dive is actually a ship, mostly used for surfacing oil platforms. A day after the accident, the Stay Dive is brought in to find and raise the missing helicopter from the bottom of the North Sea. The investigation gets off to a good start. Within a day, the television cameras on board the Stay Dive's 2 submersibles locate what's left of 5-6 Charlie on the seabed. But raising it is a different matter. They carry on working into the night. Soon, several pieces of 5-6 Charlie have been recovered, but still not the vital clue, the missing tail rotor. Ed Trimble was the AAIB's lead investigator.
But the big problem was to recover the tail rotor assembly. Without that, the investigation was literally going nowhere. We knew that the tail rotor assembly had been dangling over the side of the pylon as the helicopter had ditched, and it therefore detached at some point between the ditching and where we had caught up with the main wreckage.
Keeping the stay dive going would be costly. Ed Trimble calls his boss.
He was fairly skeptical of our chances. He asked what I thought our chances were of finding the tail rotor, and I, being an eternal optimist, I said 80%. To which he replied, I think you'd be very lucky if you've got a 10% chance of recovering the tail rotor assembly in the North Sea.
Ed Trimble stays up all night, relentlessly monitoring the underwater cameras.
I didn't want to be in a situation where we would have missed any evidence of further wreckage, and in particular, any parts of the tail rotor assembly.
Go get yourself a coffee, Eddie.
And by the time 8 o'clock was looming, I decided to go down to the galley to get a coffee. And I couldn't have been away any more than maximum 7 to 10 minutes when I suddenly heard these tremendously excited shouts from our team.
Yes, Eureka, we found it!
As I walked in, or ran in, there, smack in the middle of the screen, was the whole of the tail rotor assembly. And even at the first glance, I could see that one of the tail rotor blades showed clear evidence of a lightning strike.
The crew was right. The submarine's cameras revealed telltale burn marks on the tail rotor blade. A close look at the wreckage on the deck reveals that 2 of the main rotor blades were also struck by lightning. It's just after 1 a.m. on October 31st, 1999. 217 people on board Egypt Air Flight 990 are waiting for takeoff. The flight's command pilot is Captain Ahmed El Habashi. He has been with Egypt Air for 36 years.
Yes.
The command first officer is 36-year-old Adel Anwar.
You must have...
He switched duty with another co-pilot so he could return home in time for his wedding.
Soon be a married man. Congratulations, Adel.
Thank you very much.
The airline's chief pilot for the Boeing 767, Captain Hatem Rushdie. Kamal El Batouti used to be an Egyptian Air Force flight instructor. He is now one of the oldest first officers at Egypt Air. Just over 20 minutes after takeoff, El Batouti is about to leave his seat. Former National Transportation Safety Board investigator Greg Phillips became an expert on the events of this flight.
The relief first officer, who would have been expected to come to the cockpit somewhere during the later part of the flight, halfway or wherever he was comfortable, wherever the normal change would have been, came into the cockpit about 20 minutes after takeoff.
Hello, Jimmy. How are you?
How are you, sir?
What's news?
I slept, I swear. Just wait. Let me tell you something. I'm not going to sleep at all. I might come sit for 2 hours and then...
I slept. I slept.
You mean you're not going to get up? You will get up.
First Officer Anwar concedes and is ready to hand over to El Batouti. Normally, this is the most relaxed, easy part of a long flight for pilots and passengers alike.
Excuse me, Jimmy, while I take a quick trip to the toilet.
Go ahead, please.
Before it gets crowded, while they're still eating, I'll be back to you.
Egypt Air's Flight 990 appears to be cruising smoothly over the Atlantic.
Speak of the devil, eh?
But then, the plane dips, plunging down. The nose pitches down, creating zero-G and weightlessness throughout the aircraft.
I rely on God.
Whatever the first officer is intending, he says nothing except this phrase again and again. Captain El Habashi fights the disorientation of zero gravity, desperately trying to return to the cockpit. Warning signals indicate the dive is exceeding the maximum speed allowed for the plane, taking them to 99% of the speed of sound. This far past the plane's design limits, the stresses on the airframe are pulling it apart.
What's happening?
I rely on God. I rely on God.
Captain El Habashi pulls back hard on his control column. He tries to use the engines to power their way out of the dive by pushing forward on the throttles, but he gets nothing.
What? You shut off the engines? Rely on God.
Stressed beyond endurance, the left engine is ripped from the plane.
Egypt Air 990, New York Center. Egypt Air 990, if you copy New York
At 1:50 a.m., Flight 990 disappears from radar screens, crashing into the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, over 60 miles off the American coast. It's just after 1 a.m. on October 31st, 1999. 217 people on board Egypt Air Flight 990 are waiting for takeoff. At 20 past 1 in the morning, First Officer Adel Anwar is going through his takeoff clearance with air traffic control. Tonight, Captain Raouf Noor El-Din and First Officer Gamal El-Batouti are the relief crew. They will take over after the first 3 or 4 hours and fly the plane until shortly before Cairo. Gamal El-Batouti used to be an Egyptian Air Force flight instructor. He is now one of the oldest first officers at Egypt Air. He is so much older than the other co-pilots that out of respect they call him Captain.
Hello, Jimmy. How are you?
How are you, sir?
What's news?
I slept, I swear. Just wait. Let me tell you something. I'm not going to sleep at all. I might come sit for 2 hours and then...
I slept. I slept.
You mean you're not going to get up?
Look, if you want to sit here, there's no problem.
I'll go get something to eat and come back, all right?
Fine, fine. Look here.
And with that, El-Batouti leaves to get his meal.
Everything's under control.
Okay, Chief.
Thanks a day.
First Officer Anwar concedes and is ready to hand over to El-Batouti. Normally, this is the most relaxed, easy part of a long flight for pilots and passengers alike.
Excuse me, Jimmy, while I take a quick trip to the toilet.
Go ahead, please.
Before it gets crowded, while they're still eating, I'll be back to you.
Egypt Air's Flight 990 appears to be cruising smoothly over the Atlantic.
Speak of the devil, eh?
But then, the plane dips, plunging down. The nose pitches down, creating zero-G and weightlessness throughout the aircraft.
I rely on God.
Whatever the first officer is intending, he says nothing except this phrase again and again. Captain El Habashi fights the disorientation of zero gravity, desperately trying to return to the cockpit. Warning signals indicate the dive is exceeding the maximum speed allowed for the plane, taking them to 99% of the speed of sound. In seconds, the engines stop and the power goes off, plunging the aircraft into darkness. Here, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorders stop. No one knows what happened in the plane during the next 2 minutes. Stressed beyond endurance, the left engine is ripped from the plane.
Egypt Air 990, New York Center. Egypt Air 990, if you copy New York
At 1:50 a.m., Flight 990 disappears from radar screens, crashing into the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, over 60 miles off the American coast. Coast Guard search and rescue get a call at 2:15 a.m. A plane has disappeared, and Coast Guard vessels are called to the scene. At the end of October, the waters of the North Atlantic are so cold that normally life expectancy is about 5 to 6 hours. At the crash site, only pieces are left. Within hours, authorities know there is little hope for survivors.
593, this is Novokuznetsk area control. Please come in.
310 miles north of the Mongolian border, air traffic controllers in Novokuznetsk wait for Flight 593 to radio that it's left their control area.
Area control, please come in.
The recovery operation gets underway. The Russian government mobilizes 238 soldiers, police, investigators, and rescuers. Everyone in the aviation world wants to know how a brand new state-of-the-art Airbus could fall out of the sky without any warning. Does the A310 have problems no one knows about? They need to find out fast. Chief Accident Investigator Ivan Mashkivsky is in charge. The crash site itself offers few clues. The ones he does have are puzzling. Unbroken bottles of champagne, a flight attendant in an oxygen mask, and finally, the body of at least one child in the cockpit. The plane's digital flight data recorder indicates the engines were running when it hit the ground. He rules out engine failure. Mashkivsky needs the expertise of a man who knows the A310 well. Someone who can also recreate the fatal flight and find out exactly what went wrong. Vladimir Biryukov is an experienced test pilot and crash investigator at the Gromov Institute in Moscow. He's an expert on the A310 Airbus.
Yeah, come.
I think you should come and listen to this.
Each investigation begins with a complete analysis of the plane's cockpit voice recorder. This time, it reveals something disturbing.
Now, come and sit in my seat. Would you like to? Come.
Daddy, can I turn these?
Yeah.
Kudrynsky was in the pilot seat, wasn't he?
Yeah, according to the diagram.
Can I turn this a bit?
Yeah, but if you turn it to the left, where will the plane go?
Left.
Right. Look out.
Again.
Can I turn this a bit?
Yeah, but if you turn it to the left, where will the plane go?
10 years ago, it wasn't unusual for people to be invited up to the cockpit. Of course, since 9/11, it's become a lot tighter, and you will find cockpit doors are locked generally throughout the flight.
Every country sets its own rules as to who has the authority or the access to the cockpit. In some countries, it's up to the captain, so the captain can invite guests up to the cockpit. But to have them actually manipulating the controls of an airplane, regardless of whether they have people on it or not, the fact that this was allowed to occur is definitely an exception in the industry.
Dad, can I go back to my seat?
The two investigators are stunned by what they hear on the cockpit voice recorder.
It's unbelievable. These two youngsters, the ones who we couldn't identify, they were not thrown into the cockpit by the crash. They were his kids.
And they were flying the plane.
Captain Kudrynsky's children are about to pay him a surprise visit in the cockpit. Flight 593 is now over 2,000 miles east of Moscow, near the middle of Siberia. It's Eldar's turn at the wheel. He's been waiting a long time for this moment. Eldar finds the control column quite stiff, but he can't make the plane turn because the autopilot is keeping it on course.
Is the plane turning?
Suddenly, the column turns easily.
Great.
His father switches the heading select knob back to its original setting, ending the turn and Eldar's illusion of flying the plane.
Why is it turning?
Is it turning by itself?
Yes, it is.
It's been just over 3 minutes since Eldar sat down in the pilot's seat. The plane is tilting sharply, a turn that's getting steeper every second. The plane appears to be turning by itself, but no one seems to know why.
Kind of zone? We've gone into a zone, a holding pattern.
Have we?
Of course we have.
An arc has replaced the straight direction line on the screen. The arc looks like a plane in a holding pattern around an airport. As they study the screen, the plane continues to turn. It's now banked at 45 degrees, which is steeper than what it was built for. Suddenly, the command bars disappear from the primary flight display. The crew no longer has any information about course or heading. The plane is flying at 370 miles an hour and banking hard. Like a quick turn in a sports car, the sudden movement of the aircraft begins to push everyone into their seats.
Guys!
The A310's autopilot works to keep the plane aloft. Suddenly, the nose pitches up. The increased G-force makes it difficult for Piskarev to reach the controls. He does his best, but nothing happens. Piskarev's hard turn to the left has had no effect on the plane.
Hold it. Hold the control column.
Eldar is the only one with both hands fully on the controls. He can only follow the most basic orders. He can't get up because the speed of the turn is pushing him back in his seat.
To the left. To the left. To the left, now to the right. The other way. I am trying to get left. Okay, get out.
Eldar has been in the pilot seat for just over 4 minutes, and now he can't leave. His body feels twice its normal weight.
Get out. Get out.
Kudrinsky can do nothing but struggle against the crippling G-forces. The aircraft is plunging towards the snowy earth, and there's nothing anyone can do. The first search party goes out to look for the Airbus in the frozen, rugged Siberian wilderness. They finally locate the remains of Flight 593 on a wooded hillside about 60 miles east of Novokuznetsk. It's soon clear there are no survivors among the 75 passengers and crew. This was a brand new aircraft, fitted with the latest technology. What could have brought it down? Why was there no warning? Not even a distress signal. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 is a routine trip from Addis Ababa to the Ivory Coast. The captain is Leola Bate. At 42, he's an extremely experienced pilot.
7,300 kilograms. Center tank is 0.
He has more than 11,000 hours of flying time to his credit.
Kilograms. Total fuel is 14,500 kilograms.
Check.
The day was a bright day, clear skies. Everything was fine.
As the plane climbs into the sky, 3 young Ethiopian men have settled into their seats. All are in their mid-20s. The plane is bound for Nairobi, but it's not where these passengers are planning to go.
We took off, everything was fine. The cabin crew called us, she asked if we want to have coffee or tea, whatever.
Yeah, thank you. Coffee? Make it 2.
The plane is flying at 39,000 feet when the 3 young Ethiopians make their move.
When I heard a noise at the back, pushing the air hostesses away.
There was some kind of noise in the cabin, and I heard the cockpit door slamming open, just bang.
3 men barge through the door and arm themselves with the cockpit's fire axe and fire extinguisher.
Get out. Get out!
There were 3 guys, they were shouting. They came straight to the co-pilot and they started hitting him. Get up!
There's 11 of us. If you don't do what we say, we'll blow this plane out of the sky.
I told them, okay, don't hurt him. I'll do whatever you want.
The hijackers make a very unusual request.
Fly to Australia.
What?
Fly us to Australia.
We don't have enough fuel to get to Australia. It's too far. We can go to Nairobi, or Zanzibar, or Dar es Salaam, and then refuel, and then go to Australia.
In fact, the jet took off with just 3.5 hours worth of fuel. But the hijackers don't know that. They've been reading the in-flight magazine, which tells them the maximum flying time of a 767.
11 hours. It won't take more than 10 hours to get to Australia.
We don't have 10 hours of fuel.
It says 11 hours.
We don't carry that much fuel. We only carry what we need.
They thought I was bluffing. They were convinced that the airplane was able to fly to Australia.
Abate is shocked. No one else in the plane knows what the hijackers are demanding. If he does what they say, his plane will crash in the ocean. If he doesn't, they say they'll blow it out of the sky. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961. This $40 million aircraft has become a 100-ton glider. The plane is out of fuel. A crash landing in the sea is all but inevitable. The loss of engine power starts rippling through the plane. As well as driving the jet through the skies, the engines supply power to most of the electrical and hydraulic systems. Without the engines, the computer screens, automatic pilot, and many other functions of the plane stop working. Although the engines are now useless, a low-tech backup system allows the pilot to retain some control. The ram air turbine, or RAT, is the last line of defense when all the engines fail. A small trap door automatically opens, and the turbine, a small propeller, pops out. The rushing air turns the propeller like a windmill, generating just enough electrical power for basic flight instruments and controls, including airspeed.
Since it was power off, that means there was no electrical or hydraulic power. The controls were heavy.
The turbine doesn't provide enough power for Abate to operate the flaps, which would help slow the plane down for landing. Wherever he lands, Captain Abate will have to do so at a dangerously high speed.
Power of landing, the power of ditching, nobody's trained in the world. Flying over the water, you need accurate instruments. I didn't have any of the instruments.
Without engines, a large passenger jet can glide 11.5 miles for every 3,300 feet of altitude it loses. At 21,000 feet, the Ethiopian Airlines plane can travel for nearly 75 miles before it hits the ground. It's an extremely dangerous situation few pilots in the world have ever faced. In 1983, another 767 pilot found himself in a similar predicament. Air Canada Flight 143 ran out of fuel and landed on an abandoned Air Force base, sustaining only minor damage. In the right circumstances, a safe landing without power is possible. Captain Abate hopes to land at the airport in the Comoros Islands. But struggling against the hijackers, on the final turn he loses his bearings and can't locate the runway.
I was within the vicinity of the airport. So I was keeping the airport in my sight all the time. Then through the struggle, I lost my position. I lost where I was.
In the critical seconds it takes to find the airport again, he loses too much altitude and doesn't know if he can make it to a runway. A water landing is now his only option. Landing on the ocean is even more dangerous than bringing a plane down on the ground.
Oh my God!
The ditching was very rough. The aircraft broke apart into 3 pieces.
In the end, of the 175 people on board the plane, 50 survive. Without the actions of Abate, many more could have died. Tuesday, August 2nd, 2005, Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. Just a few minutes before 2 in the afternoon, Flight 358 powers into the sky above Paris. A regular flight from Paris to Toronto takes about 8 hours. As Air France 358 closes in on Canada, there is little to separate this trip from any other. At Toronto's International Airport, the thunderstorms are already rolling through. Rain, wind, and lightning are hammering the runways. Just as Flight 358 closes in on Toronto, it's put into a holding pattern. The weather isn't getting any better.
Air France 358, this is Toronto Tower.
Toronto Tower, Air France 358, go ahead.
You are cleared to land runway 24 left. Be advised, preceding aircraft reports braking action is poor, and they estimate the surface winds near the runway as 290 degrees at 15 to 20 knots.
Braking poor, 15 knots, gust to 20. Air France 358, thank you.
The crew is being sent to runway 24 left, which will allow them to land into the wind. Facing unpredictable winds and a wet runway, the crew prepares for the landing.
Select auto brakes to medium. Medium is set. Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
At 2 minutes after 4 o'clock, Air France Flight 358 roars over the beginning of the runway. Then, moments after touching down, still traveling at 90 miles per hour, Flight 358 runs out of room. Emergency workers reach the burning jet just 52 seconds after it crashes. But with the threat of an explosion, it's dangerous to get too close. Some of the passengers who escaped the plane stagger to the edge of the highway, where passing motorists stop to take them to the airport. As people are brought in, airport employees struggle to account for all the passengers and crew. Relatives wait desperately for any news. Finally, hours after the crash, passengers are reunited with their families. It takes hours to confirm, but by early evening, Air France and the local airport authorities can make the incredible announcement. Remarkably, every single passenger and all the members of the crew of Flight 358 have managed to escape the burning wreckage of their plane. The next day, smoke and charred wreckage are all that remain of Air France Flight 358. Canada's Transportation Safety Board quickly begins investigating the accident.
Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
Rain and lightning had been pounding the airport all afternoon. Was it simply bad weather that caused this crash?
Put it down! Put it down!
Investigators discover that as the crew struggled for control in the cockpit, on the ground, delicate instruments used to measure the wind at the runway were destroyed by lightning. With the ground equipment destroyed, they were relying on their onboard systems for information about wind conditions. But 2 planes had touched down just minutes before the Air France flight on the same runway. The crews of those planes did their best to inform air traffic control of the tricky conditions.
Air France 358, this is Toronto Tower.
Toronto Tower, Air France 358, go ahead.
You are cleared to land runway 24 left. Be advised, preceding aircraft reports braking action is poor, and they estimate the surface winds near the runway as 290 degrees at 15 to 20 knots.
Braking poor, 15 knots, gust.
23-mile-an-hour winds are strong, but are well within the allowable range for landing an A340. But when investigators study radar images of the airport, they discover quite a different story. As Flight 358 landed, a sharp line of rain moved across the runway from north to south. It was driven by a sudden gust of wind of up to 38 miles per hour. The crew of the Air France jet had to deal with conditions that were much worse than they were expecting.
Landing, autopilot, auto thrust off.
blinded by rain, driven by unexpected winds, and landing on the shortest runway at the airport, Flight 358 was in a dangerous position. But even in bad conditions, even on a short runway, the crew had more than 9,800 feet in which to land their plane. It should have been enough. To find out why it wasn't, investigators looked to the past. In 1999, an eerily similar accident took place in Little Rock, Arkansas.
I can't see it. Way off.
Struggling with unpredictable weather, the crew of an American Airlines jet landed their plane only to have it skid off the runway. 11 people were killed. Greg Feith helped investigate that crash. In the Little Rock crash, Feith discovered that the crew had made a critical mistake, which contributed significantly to the accident. Spoilers are only one of several ways pilots of passenger jets stop their massive planes. Reverse thrusters are used to redirect the engine power forward as the plane lands, and sophisticated brakes help slow the jets down. To rule out any mechanical fault, all three systems are examined by investigators of the Air France crash. One of the brakes on Flight 358 was destroyed in the fire, but the 7 other sets of brakes are all tested after the accident. All of them are working properly.
Flaps 2.
Investigators in Toronto also discover that, unlike in the Little Rock crash, this time the spoilers had deployed properly.
Gear down, spoilers armed, 4 green.
And when the engines are examined, the reverse thrusters are deployed. No obvious mechanical fault can be found. June 24th, 1982. British Airways Flight 9 cruises through the sky over Indonesia. In a few hours, the plane and all 263 people on board are scheduled to land in Perth, Australia. As the jet flies over the city of Jakarta, it's cruising at more than 36,000 feet and has been in the air for an hour and a half. Captain Moody checks his weather radar. It shows smooth sailing for the next 300 miles.
All right, Roger, it's all clear. Just keep your eyes open. I'll be back in a moment. Just got to use the loo.
In the cockpit, the flight takes an unsettling turn.
St. Elmo's fire?
I don't think so. It's not moving the way it should.
St. Elmo's fire is a natural phenomenon that's sometimes seen when planes fly through highly charged thunderclouds, but there aren't supposed to be any thunderclouds tonight.
When did it start?
Or just after you stepped out.
Anything on radar?
No, it's clear, not a cloud. Oh my lord, look at engine 4! It's lit up somehow. Captain, have a look at number 1.
It's the same on my side.
None of the crew have ever seen anything like this before, but the light show is just the beginning. Their bizarre flight is about to take a terrifying turn for the worse. The 747 is more than 6 miles above the ocean. Its engines appear to be burning. The 747 has plenty of fuel, yet somehow all 4 of the jet's engines have completely stopped working.
Roger, declare emergency.
Mayday, 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 Speedbird 9. We have lost all 4 engines out of 370. Mayday, 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 Speedbird 9. We have lost all 4 engines out of 3.
With no engine power and no idea what has crippled their plane, British Airways Flight 9 begins falling from the sky.
Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9. We have lost all 4 engines, now out of 360.
First Officer Roger Greaves issues a mayday, but he has trouble getting his message across.
Have you got a problem?
Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9. We have lost all 4 engines. Repeat, all 4 engines. Now descending through flight level 350.
Speedbird 9, you have lost number 4 engine?
This idiot doesn't understand. Jakarta Control, Speedbird 9, we have lost all 4 engines. Repeat, all 4 engines. Now descending through flight level 350. 4 engines.
Only when another plane nearby relays the Mayday call do controllers in Jakarta
Now
understand.
descending through flight level 350.
Speedbird 9, all 4 engines out. Understood. Standing by.
As far as the crew knows, no 747 had ever lost power to all of its engines before. The crew has to find out why it's happening now. While not built for gliding, even without its engines, a 747 can travel forward 9 miles for every half mile it drops. With no power, Flight 9 has started a long, slow fall. Some 6 miles above the ocean, the crew has less than half an hour before they smash into the sea. In the cockpit, the flight crew is relieved, but also concerned that they might be at fault.
Every time, because it's going to come back to us.
The damage to the 747 is extensive. From the outside, the crew realizes that their windshield has been deeply scratched. They see bare metal showing through where the paint has somehow been stripped away. And they still have no idea why any of this happened. The engines were manufactured by Rolls-Royce. Their investigation is led by a former Rolls-Royce engineer, Malcolm Grayburn.
We did do a forensic analysis of the engines. We did record it all in terms of photographic analysis, and also we did a lot of laboratory analysis.
Grayburn discovers the engines were choked with fine dust, pieces of rock and sand. When it was closely studied, they learned that the debris was clearly volcanic ash. Days after their harrowing flight, the passengers and crew learned that the night they were flying, there had been a major eruption of the Mount Galunggung volcano, located just 100 miles southeast of Jakarta. Tom Casadeval is director of the U.S. Geological Survey and has studied the Galunggung volcano.
Indonesia is the world's most volcanically active country. It has more than 130 historically active volcanoes, meaning volcanoes which have erupted in the last several thousand years. Galunggung erupted explosively early in the 1980s. In April, May, June of 1982, the eruptions became increasingly more powerful.
The night Flight 9 flew nearby, the volcano erupted again. As the ash cloud rose more than 49,000 feet into the night, winds pushed it to the southwest, right into the path of British Airways Flight 9. Never before had a volcanic cloud seriously affected an airplane. Could the ash have crippled this flight?
Roger, declare emergency.
Mayday, 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 Speedbird 9. We have lost all 4 engines.
Unlike ash that you might see in a chimney or after a fire in a forest, this is not soft material at all. This is very fine, ground-up particles of solid rock and minerals. This material is very, very abrasive. It's very angular in shape. If you were to see it under a microscope, you would see very sharp angles. And so that's what caused the abrasion.
In addition to sandblasting the windshield and all the leading edges of the plane, could the ash cloud explain all the other strange phenomena the passengers and crew had experienced? Early evening, June 2nd, 1983. Just before 7 o'clock, the plane is a little more than halfway to Toronto.
What was that?
3 circuit breakers have popped out. Like fuses, they protect delicate electrical circuits in the plane from becoming overloaded. In the cabin, one of the passengers complains about a disturbing odor.
Yeah, that is a strange smell.
A wisp of smoke is leaking out of the washroom. It's 2 minutes past 7, just 11 minutes since the circuit breakers first popped out. Laura Kayama brings Captain Cameron the disturbing news.
Excuse me, Captain. There's a fire in the washroom in the back. They just went back to go put it out.
You want me to go back?
Yeah, go.
A fire on board an aircraft is one of the worst situations any crew can face. The plane is some 6 miles high. What starts as a spark can turn deadly in a few short minutes. But at the moment, Cameron doesn't know how bad the situation is. The crew is growing concerned. They've already moved passengers toward the front of the jet, as far as possible from the creeping smoke. Captain Donald Cameron is waiting for an update from the back of the plane, when suddenly he's got a new problem. The master warning light is on. Electrical systems throughout the plane, including some in the cockpit, begin to fail. Co-pilot Claude Ouimet is at the back of the plane. The washroom door handle has become hot to the touch. He doesn't even risk opening it. Faced with a potential fire on board, the crew has no choice but to land their plane as soon as possible. As soon as the decision is made, another warning light goes on. They've just lost most of their emergency power. Cameron finds that a critical piece of his plane isn't working properly. The horizontal stabilizer on the tail of his DC-9 is frozen, set for cruising at almost 33,000 feet. Cameron uses the part that's still working, the elevators, to make the plane dive. But like a car that's lost power steering, the aircraft resists. As Cameron pushes on the controls, they push back with a pressure equal to 44 pounds. Squinting through the smoke, the crew of Flight 797 lands hard. At 20 minutes after 7, the Air Canada plane is on the ground. It's less than 30 minutes since the first sign of any trouble on board Flight 797. The cabin is pitch black and burning hot. Passengers who have found the exit slide off the wing and stumble to safety. The passengers who escaped the plane suffer from smoke inhalation and minor injuries, but most are not badly hurt. What began as a simple electrical problem has taken the lives of 23 people. What caused the deadly fire? What went so horribly wrong? Investigators study all the wire splices they can find on Flight 797 that weren't destroyed in the fire, but they find no evidence of arcing or short-circuiting. Investigators turn their attention to the cockpit voice recorder and the popping circuit breakers.
What was that? It's right there, I see it. Right there.
Yeah.
Like a machine gun. Yeah. Zap, zap, zap.
The circuit breakers trip as a precaution. When they begin to overheat, the circuit breakers turn off, cutting electrical current to the motor. It's a safety feature so the motor won't cause a fire.
Pops as I push it.
Investigators need to know if the breakers were tripped by a fire that had already started, or was the motor itself the problem. The NTSB builds a mock-up of the plane's washroom and forces the flush motor to seize. They want to see if it could have started the fire. The seized motor reaches a temperature of 802 degrees Fahrenheit. It's hot, but it's not enough to ignite parts of the washroom around the motor. As they listen to the cockpit voice recorder, investigators uncover a puzzling clue. 3 minutes before the circuit breakers popped, the recorder picked up another noise. It was the sound of electrical arcing, like static, repeated 8 times. The noises weren't audible to the crew. Hidden from view on any airplane is a river of wiring. Investigators focus on a cable coming from a generator below the washroom floor. Insulation had rubbed off 2 wires, making it possible for sparks to be produced, sparks that could start a fire. In spite of countless hours of investigation and numerous tests, in the end, the NTSB can't pinpoint the exact cause of the fire. There simply isn't enough evidence. Even if they'll never know the exact cause of the fire, investigators try to understand how it could cause so much damage. There had been heat and smoke, but no one had seen any flames until an explosion ripped through the jet. The fire had burned out of sight behind the washroom walls, and the smoke, hot gases, and fumes intensified and spread inside the wall space from the washroom through to the cabin walls. Those spaces acted as a sort of chimney for the gases and smoke that the fire was creating. Although the fire remained concealed behind the walls and ceiling panels, the smoke and hot gases entered the cabin through every seam, gathering in the upper space in the cabin and pressing down on passengers. When the doors were opened during the evacuation, an unlimited supply of oxygen was suddenly available to feed the fire. The more intense the heat, the more oxygen hungry a fire becomes. The gases ignited with the force of an explosion. Every night, commercial pilots must fly over this tall, rocky outcrop to land at Guam's Agana International Airport. Flights come from airports all across Asia. Just past midnight on August 6, 1997, Korean Airlines Flight 801 is on its way to Guam from Seoul, South Korea. Captain Park has navigated Nimitz Hill 9 times before, but this time there's a major difference. At airports around the world, pilots land with the help of a glide slope, an electronic system that helps planes safely touch down. If pilots follow the directions given by the glide slope, it guides them to the foot of the runway. The glide slope beacon at Guam Airport has been removed for extensive maintenance. But impaired navigation is only part of the problem. Captain Park is fighting exhaustion. As the plane flies closer to the ground, the crew expects they'll see the airport any second, but the rain makes it hard to see anything.
Isn't the glide slope working? Wiper on.
Then a computerized voice fills the cockpit. It's the ground proximity warning system, which tells the crew they're just 500 feet in the air. But they still can't see the runway.
I've done this flight many, many times before. And when I estimated we're about 30 seconds from landing, I bent down to put my shoes on.
200.
The plane is now just 200 feet above the ground, but still the crew can't see the runway. They're quickly running out of time.
Let's make a missed approach. Not in sight. Not in sight. Missed approach. Go around. Go around. Perhaps.
wooded hillside in Guam, the shattered plane finally grinds to a halt. It's not until the dawn finally comes that rescue workers can see the extent of the damage. The plane has spilled down the mountain and broken into several large pieces. Only 26 people survived the disaster. Blinded by rain and relying on their equipment, the crew of Korean Air Flight 801 thought they were heading straight at the runway. When they realized something was wrong, it was too late. As the investigation continues, Feith and his team make a startling discovery. Equipment that would have given the crew more time to react had been disabled on purpose. The final accident investigation report is published more than 2 years after the crash. It lays blame on the Korean Airlines training methods and the crew's over-reliance on the jet's automation. But it also has sharp words reserved for the FAA, the body that regulates air travel in the United States. Because of an FAA decision, a critical piece of technology that could have saved Flight 801 was intentionally disabled. The Minimum Safe Altitude Warning System, or MSAW, is a standard piece of equipment at major American airports. But in Guam, the FAA had made a critical alteration to the way it was used.
Contact the Agana Tower.
MSAW uses radar to watch the planes as they come into the airport. If they're too low, a warning is given to air traffic controllers who can then relay it to the crew. But in Guam, the system kept giving nuisance readings to controllers.
The controllers kept getting these nuisance warnings. They redesigned the software and moved the limitations of the MSAW further away from the airport where it afforded no one a level of protection.
Instead of watching the planes as they neared the airport, the system in Guam now tracked them when they were some 50 miles away, over the ocean.
I think the best way to describe that would have been, and should be, irresponsible. Because you've taken this system that was designed as a level of protection, not only for the controller, but you've taken the protection away from the flying public.
For the passengers and crew of Flight 801, the lack of the MSAW system sealed their fate. If the system had been working, the crash could have been avoided. Without it, the crew had no warning at all. Colorado Springs Municipal Airport, Air Traffic Controller James Rayfield is ready to bring Flight 585 in.
United 585, report the airport in sight.
Got it?
Yep.
Airport in sight, United 585.
Lower landing gear.
United 585 is cleared for a visual approach to runway 35. Weather conditions.
Wind 320 degrees at 16, gusting at 29.
As its speed decreases, Flight 585 becomes more vulnerable to the turbulence. Eidson wants to know what other planes have experienced on landing.
Any reports lately of any loss or gain of airspeed?
Yes, ma'am. 500 feet, a 50-knot loss.
At 400 feet, a 50-knot gain.
And at 150 feet, a gain of 20 knots.
Green and Eidson focus on keeping their speed constant as they descend.
We had a 10-knot change here.
Yeah, I know. Awful lot of power to hold that airspeed.
Another 10-knot gain.
30 flaps.
As the aircraft closes in on the airport, the ride gets even bumpier.
Wow. We're at 1,000 feet.
Then, without warning, the 737 starts to spin out of control. NTSB investigators examine over 2,000 aviation accidents a year, at times by picking through the metal debris of fallen aircraft. While coroners mark the location of human remains in red, NTSB investigators mark scraps of metal in yellow, looking for clues to help them solve the mystery of Flight 585. Like investigating a mass murder, it's a tough job walking onto a crash site. Among the investigators assigned to the case is Malcolm Brenner, a specialist in human performance. His job will be to find out if the crash was caused by pilot error.
The area was cordoned off by police, and there were Salvation Army trucks. I got a cup of coffee, a cup of hot chocolate or something, and I thanked them for it, and they said, no, thank you. And they had this look in their eyes like, my God, you have to go into this site.
Clues to the fate of United 585 lie mangled in a deep black hole. The fuselage is crushed like an accordion in the impact crater. The rest of the plane is in pieces, spread over an area smaller than a football field.
There was a lot of fire damage. There'd been a fire afterwards, and it was all contained in a relatively small area, which just initial impression, it can be a sign that the airplane was intact. If there was a mid-air explosion or something came off the airplane, you'd expect that to be a much larger site.
The National Transportation Safety Board begins a painstaking investigation into the crash. Engine turbines, hydraulic pressure gauges, the cockpit voice recorder, and in-flight data recorder are all carefully extracted from the site, photographed, and sent to the lab for analysis.
Brooklyn Center, Dynasty 006. We're declaring an emergency. We request a direct route to San Francisco.
Well, they cleared all the other airplanes out of the way. They gave him clear runway, so nobody was waiting. Didn't have to wait for anybody else. He went straight in for a landing.
Dynasty 006, Oakland Center, you are now cleared. You are free to descend at pilot's discretion.
Captain Ho not only has injuries on board, the plane itself has been severely damaged. His rear elevators, which help control the altitude of the plane, don't seem to be working. Without them, landing his jet safely will be extremely difficult.
The problem is it's a very big airplane and it responds very, very slowly, and you just might not do it before you run out of air. You might hit the ocean. What you need is a very cool head.
Captain Ho must now land using varying amounts of engine thrust. It's a controlled fall towards the runway.
As we came in, we flew over the house in Atherton where I had lived, where my kids had been born. And I looked down and said, boy, this is fitting. If we don't make it down, or if this plane explodes on landing because it's been so badly torqued and ruptured, at least I got to see that. He made one of the best landings I've ever seen. I mean, it was just perfect touchdown.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ho speaking. Wishing you a safe journey. I hope you enjoyed our uneventful flight. Thank you for flying China Airlines. We hope you fly with us again.
The cockpit voice recorder is sent to Washington, but it's designed to tape over itself every 30 minutes. None of what happened in the cockpit during the terrifying plunge from the sky remains.
Without a cockpit voice recorder, we had to reconstruct what the crew said and how they interpreted things and what was going on in the cockpit to the best of our abilities with the other data that was available to us.
A record of the plane's instrument activity during the flight has been captured by the flight data recorder. But again, the team runs into a problem. The flight data recorder experienced unprecedented stress during the dive. There were electrical interruptions too, which caused gaps in the recording. Investigators begin with what they do have. Passengers and crew report that just before the failure of the jet's fourth engine, the plane flew through unexpected turbulence. Had this caused the engine to fail? Satellite weather maps reveal that there was indeed heavy air turbulence over the Pacific. But it wasn't severe enough to cause engine failure. The jet's 4 engines are tested and studied. Even after the horrific dive to the sky, they're found to be in working order. However, given the previous history of problems with Engine 4, it receives particular scrutiny. The wear on a small throttle valve trimmer is measured. It's worn down by only 4 1/1000ths of an inch, but that's enough to restrict the fuel flow to Engine 4. Investigators determined that at 39,000 feet, Engine 4 did indeed deliver weaker than normal thrust. It's known as a hung engine. The aircraft logbook reveals that Engine 4 had been written up on 2 previous occasions just the week before. But after weeks of investigation, the NTSB concludes that the engine didn't need to be replaced. All the repairs were done according to the book. A faulty engine was not the cause of the accident. And even with the loss of one engine, the plane shouldn't have been in immediate danger. A 747 is designed to fly on only 3 engines. The FAA, which regulates the airline industry in the United States, acted swiftly to improve safety. A new kind of transponder was required for smaller planes, the kind that might have helped air traffic controllers recognize that a private aircraft posed a danger. A new system called Mode C Intruder was also developed to warn air traffic controllers.
Mode C Intruder is an automated program that is now incorporated in all our major radar facilities, that if an aircraft should inadvertently intrude, the controller will now be given a visual and an oral alert, thus giving him time to provide a timely warning to the pilot.
Check. Seatbelts, engine.
Even for the most diligent pilot, the old strategy of see and avoid had serious limitations. Those limitations would be addressed with the most important innovation of all.
The major technological innovation that came out of the Cerritos Mid-Air was the congressional mandate that all air carrier aircraft operating within the United States would be outfitted with TCAS, Traffic Collision and Avoidance System.
John Andrews worked in the team that developed TCAS.
The TCAS collision avoidance system, which was under development, quite possibly could have prevented this accident. TCAS gives the pilot a traffic advisory at 45 seconds before the potential collision.
Hey Maria, everything okay back there?
And then at approximately 25 seconds or so before the potential collision, a resolution advisory is given to actually tell the pilots to climb or descend to avoid the altitude of the other aircraft.
Today, commercial airlines around the world use TCAS. In Cerritos, a memorial garden now marks the day of the disaster. Mary Wong has since remarried, but the pain of returning home that day will never go away.
There's nobody here. The house is empty. Derek was already living in an apartment in San Diego, and here I was no longer a mother, except to Derek, and I was no longer a wife. And so it shattered my whole world.
Days after the disaster, Mary Wong met one of the few people who could fully understand her loss.
I went to the memorial service, and it was very important to me to try to meet somebody else who had gone through this. And I knew from reading stories that Teresa had lost her husband and 2 children. And so I saw someone there who I thought was Teresa.
She says, "Are you Teresa Estrada?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She says, "Well, my name is Mary Wong." And she says,
I said, "I lost my husband and children also."
I just wanted to grab her and hug her because she was feeling what I was feeling.
So we had an immediate connection, and we've maintained our friendship over these 20 years.
Everyone who flies today has been affected by the mid-air collision over Cerritos. The disaster led to historic improvements in aviation safety. Nilsen Sponheimer is brought in to look at other evidence. An expert in aerial navigation, he plots the plane's doomed final minutes.
My initial look at the flight track of the aircraft showed a 7-degree bearing error in the final segment of the approach.
A small error when traveling at hundreds of miles an hour could quickly lead to an enormous problem. But why would the plane get off course at the end of the trip if the rest of the flight showed no major navigational problems? In the wreckage of the Air Force flight, investigators discover an important piece of the puzzle. The plane's ADF, or automatic direction finder, is recovered. It appears to be working, but only one of the units had been installed in this jet. To perform a proper landing in Dubrovnik, plane requires 2 ADFs. The device listens to the signals put out by the land-based beacons, but it can only listen to one at a time. Flying with only 1 ADF, the crew can listen either to the outer beacon at Kolosep or the inner beacon at the airport, but both beacons are needed for a proper approach.
That would have required 2 ADF receivers in the aircraft, which the accident aircraft had only 1. And only having 1 ADF restricted their ability to follow the approach accurately.
By quickly tuning back and forth between the 2 beacons, the crew can use 1 ADF to listen to 2 signals. But it would have added stress to an already difficult landing. The Air Force jet wasn't adequately equipped to land at this airport.
You're talking in a very short time span of making the approach. It's going to become rather difficult in trying to dial both to keep listening to the code if you're also trying to search for your course and headings.
As he continues to study the path that IFO-21 took, Nilsen Sponheimer focuses on an S-shaped curve in the plane's flight. It's the sort of path a plane would take when looking for a signal from a non-directional beacon. But just when the crew should be looking for the beacon signal, the S-turns disappear.
At about 2 or 3 miles inside that final approach fix, for the next 7 or 8, 9 miles, the flight track is perfectly straight.
Instead of trusting the navigational system that was in place, even though it was primitive, the crew suddenly seems to give up. And Sponheimer thinks he knows why. Fighting heavy rain and hampered by a single direction finder, Sponheimer believes the crew turned to a newer technology called INS, or Inertial Navigation System, to find the runway. But INS is an en route navigational system and should not be used for airport approach.
An INS system uses gyroscopes to maintain an awareness of how much the airplane turns and banks.
After entering a specific geographical position at the beginning of a flight, an inertial navigation system tracks all the turns a plane makes. It's a self-contained system on the aircraft, but there is a potentially enormous problem. If the gyroscopes don't perfectly calculate every single maneuver of the plane, a pilot can be off course.
It's not very broken up down there. I can't see through it. Tim?
The crew might have thought that switching to this system would help them find their way, but in this case, it might have put the plane dangerously off course. Peter Galbraith is waiting at the airport with Croatia's Prime Minister.
It was clear from my own flight in that this was a very marginal landing. I did not expect them to attempt the landing in Dubrovnik. The Croatian Prime Minister came up to me and pulled me aside, and he said, "We've lost radio contact with Ron Brown's plane." I got the State Department Operations Center on the phone, and he asked to activate the U.S. military to start search and rescue activities.
The search and rescue effort focuses on the approach to the airport. Perhaps the plane had ditched into the Adriatic.
At the time, I was about 100 miles away. I was in Brindisi, Italy. We launched 2 of our MH-53 helicopters with Special Tactics Air Force personnel on board, headed to Dubrovnik.
For hours, there is no sign of the missing aircraft. The weather conditions are getting worse.
Fog was in, thunderstorms in the area, low visibility.
IFO-21 Dubrovnik approach, do you read?
IFO-21 has a CPI, or crash position indicator, on board.
IFO-21, do you read?
If the plane went down, the CPI should be sending out an ultra-high frequency signal.
IFO-21 Dubrovnik approach.
But the Dubrovnik airport, as well as lacking radar, does not have the equipment to pick up the signal.
IFO-21 Dubrovnik approach, do you read? IFO-21, do you read? IFO-21, do you read?
As the hours pass, poor visibility frustrates the searchers.
They arrived off the coast, and they were over water looking for the crash.
Hours after the plane disappears, police respond to a tip. A local villager has seen something on the hill above his house. It's a long way from the coast where the search is concentrated.
We went up with 2 vehicles to check the mountains. The weather was extremely horrible. Strong rain and thick fog. So we went on foot for about an hour up that mountain. Then we came close.
It's almost 7:30 at night, 4.5 hours after the crew called for clearance to land. The crash of IFO-21 is finally confirmed. The news races from Dubrovnik to America.
The crash site has been reached by Croatian police, and I've just received word that there's also a Croatian doctor on the scene.
The tail section is the only substantial piece of IFO-21 that's left. Debris and bodies are scattered across the mountain. No one has survived the crash of IFO-21. The jet climbs through a pitch-black night. Without a moon to light the scene, it's hard for the passengers to see much of anything out their windows. In the cockpit, the simple turn over the Red Sea is taking a bizarre twist.
See what the aircraft just did?
Captain Kadir doesn't like the way his plane is behaving.
Turning right, sir.
What?
Aircraft is turning right.
Turning right? How turning right?
The plane is supposed to be turning left on its way to Cairo. Instead, it's turning in the opposite direction.
Okay. Come out.
The captain tries to get his plane back on course, but his situation just gets worse. Knowing he's in trouble, the captain tells the first officer to engage the autopilot.
Autopilot! Autopilot!
But it doesn't work. The 737 is now flying almost completely on its side. The plane gains speed as it spirals towards the Red Sea. Just minutes after takeoff, the plane is out of control. Diving toward the water, it's traveling at more than 430 miles an hour. Everyone on board can feel the tremendous speed and gut-wrenching turns. The enormous G-forces are making it difficult for Captain Kadir Abdullah to fly the plane. Ashraf Abdel Hamid, the third member of the flight crew, tells the captain to slow the plane down.
Retard power! Retard power! Retard power!
The plane is traveling so fast, it's ready to tear itself apart. After flying almost upside down, the crew is finally beginning to bring their plane under control. The ground proximity warning. They're getting dangerously close to the Red Sea. It's just before 5 in the morning, minutes after the plane took off from the airport. It's disappeared from local radar screens. By the time the sun rises, the crash site is found, but there's little for rescuers to do. The plane shattered on impact. There are no survivors. All 148 people on board the plane are dead. Moments before impact, the captain seemed to be back in command of his airplane. If there had been some crippling mechanical problem, why did it seem to disappear? Some members of the team want to consider something besides mechanical fault. The pilots themselves.
I think the major concern for the United States was that the human factors elements of this accident weren't thoroughly explored.
Perhaps the high esteem given to Egyptian pilots was getting in the way.
In Egypt, pilots are very respected, and in particular, Air Force pilots are very highly regarded. For the past 26 years, the country's president has been a highly decorated Air Force officer. In an environment like this, the pilot is somewhat immune to suspicion. When something goes wrong, the natural tendency is to blame the equipment.
And on this flight, the pilot was a war hero with thousands of hours of experience. Studying the flight data recorders again, the investigators discover something peculiar. Even before the plane's bizarre turn to the right, three things all seem to happen at the same time. Instead of a smooth left turn, the plane begins to come out of its turn early. The nose starts to rise, and the plane's airspeed decreases noticeably. But during this time, the pilot says nothing. It seems that he's unaware of the changes to his flight path.
I've flown out of Sharm el-Sheikh at nighttime and in the same type of aircraft. And in no way should the pilot allow the airspeed to drop by as much as 30 knots, or the bank angle to change beyond 5 degrees without clearly stating the reasons for the change in the flight path.
Some investigators consider a provocative theory that might explain this seemingly bizarre behavior. Perhaps Captain Kadir had been affected by vertigo.
Vertigo is a physiological condition that would exist with any person, not just pilots, and it's based on the inner ear. over a dark ocean without a defined visual horizon, no ground lights, the pilot may not be able to perceive visually whether he was flying up, down, left, or right. And if the fluid in his inner ear was moving or he tilted his head, that may induce a sensation, a physiological sensation, that may cause the pilot to believe the airplane is flying straight and level when it's actually turning.
Egyptian investigators agree that Captain Kadir may have suffered some form of disorientation during the flight. After 3 hours in the air, everyone who didn't have bottled oxygen would have been unconscious. As it approached Athens, Flight 522 was now a ghost plane. The Greek Air Force scrambles 2 of its most sophisticated fighter jets to investigate the Helios plane.
Helios 522, do you read? Over. Helios 522,
but the pilots aren't getting any response. One of the jets flies closer to the 737. Someone is in the co-pilot's seat, slumped over the controls, but there's no sign of the captain at all. The fighter pilot radios air traffic control at Athens.
Athens ACC, there is one figure in the cockpit of Helios 522. He appears non-responsive. Athens ACC, checking the cabin.
He can see passengers in their seats, but none of them react to the presence of the jet. Then the pilot sees someone moving in the cockpit.
Athens control, there is one person moving in the cockpit of Helios 522. Repeat, there is one person inside the cockpit.
Helios 522, do you read? Over.
522, over. Flight HCY 522, this is Athene radar control. How do you hear?
The F-16s continue shadowing the jet, but there's no response at all from the cockpit.
One of them was actually in a shooting position behind the 737. The other one was nearby the cockpit and he was trying to communicate visually with the person in the cockpit.
Suddenly, the 737 turns left and begins to quickly descend.
After the ACC, Helios 522 turning sharply, following down.
From nearly 33,000 feet, the plane drops towards the ground.
There is no structural failure, there is no fire, there is no problem, obvious problem from the external view with the plane.
Helios 522, over, do you read?
Helios 522.
Do you read? Over.
Then, nearly 6,900 feet above the ground, the person in the captain's seat acknowledges the fighter jet for the very first time. But no words are exchanged. Neither the fighter pilot nor local air traffic control can make radio contact with the jet. Just after 12 o'clock, almost 3 hours after it took off from the island of Cyprus, Helios Flight 522 slams into the ground.
After the ACC, Helios 522 is down. Repeat, Helios 522 is down on Gramatico Hill. Over.
Fire and rescue workers rush to the crash site. There are no survivors. Most of the 121 victims are from Cyprus. The small island nation declares 3 days of mourning following the crash. After 3 hours in the air, everyone who didn't have bottled oxygen would have been unconscious. As it approached Athens, Flight 522 was now a ghost plane.
Most of the victims, they probably still had heartbeats when the airplane crashed, but almost certainly were in an irreversible coma.
Hypoxia is no more painful than falling asleep. But for Andreas Prodromou, the flight must have been a nightmare. As the F-16s roared to meet the jet, and with his oxygen running out, he must have known that he too was almost out of time. Yet to the very end, he didn't give up. Prodromou made one last attempt to save the plane. When he returns to the cockpit, the young flight attendant who dreamed of becoming a pilot calls for help. But no one can hear him, probably because the radio was still tuned to Larnaca, the airport on Cyprus where the flight had taken off. Fighting hypoxia and struggling to control an airplane larger than any he had ever flown, Prodromou was in an impossible situation. Even if he could have landed the plane, it was now too late. Flight 522 was out of time and out of fuel. Pictures of Andreas in Cyprus, in the cemetery where he and his girlfriend Haris are buried side by side.
As his father, my son is in front of me. Wherever I go, he's always there. He left a very big gap. We will never get over it.